like we are live and recording at present to me, based on the way the WebEx is presenting right now. I think we can start.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, good morning, everyone. And I call as chair of the board of directors, TCHC, I call the meeting to order. And I'm going to defer our land acknowledgement for a few minutes because we have a couple of special guests in the form of the city manager and his worship, the Lord Mayor of Toronto, because we wanted to pay tribute and recognize the service of our CEO, as this is his last board meeting, who has done an incredible job as the CEO of our organization. And so I wanted to give the floor and the opportunity to talk a bit about, can we get people to put themselves on mute who are deciding to rearrange their furniture as we're talking? Hand the floor over to the mayor and then the city manager to talk a bit about the great service Kevin has done to the city and, most importantly, the tenants of our organization. So with that, Mayor, it's over to you.
Tim, thank you. And first of all, I had commented before we live streamed that I didn't think I'd been to a Toronto Community Housing Board meeting before. It does give me an opportunity, though, to say something I don't get a chance to say because I'm not there, which is to say thank you to you as chair and to the directors. This is a very challenging corporation to run. It's a big enterprise to begin with, and it is then a big enterprise that has a lot of different aspects to it. And I'm quite frankly, we have a long way to go, as we all know, but I'm very proud of actually the progress that we've made, and a good deal of that has been under Kevin's leadership, and I'm going to make reference to that. But of course, it's also been under the leadership of the board, and that includes my council colleagues who put a lot of time and a lot of their heart into this, because I think you go on to the Toronto Community Housing Board, and as people may know, councillors sign up, for the boards they want to be appointed to, and people volunteer for this assignment. And I think in the case of the councillors that we have on the board now, they're people who deeply care about the tenants, as you say, and about Toronto Community Housing. What do I say about Kevin? Kevin and I have looked back before city government, and how he ended up sort of here after we had been for a time working together at Rogers. I don't remember how that sort of course, but I will tell you that while he and I would have told you that working for Ted Rogers was one of the most challenging experiences one could ever have, and I mean, he was a guy you learned a lot from. He was a guy that was a brilliant man, probably the greatest Canadian entrepreneur of the 20th century, but he was just impossible sometimes to deal with. And so I would say that Kevin probably found his monthly meetings with me, were sort of not as bad as what Ted Rogers called his tickler meetings. And Ted Rogers kept tickler files. Everything you ever said you would do, every memo he ever wrote, you wrote him, was in this tickler file. And so I'll tell the truth and tell you that there were times we went in when he was on vacation and cleaned out his tickler file. So some memos he kept would just disappear from the file because there were just things he'd raised from 8 years ago. And he'd say, well, how come you didn't do this from 8 years ago? And it was because we never had any intention of doing it because it was just crazy. But having said that, Kevin went through that, and also the experience we had working there. And I guess he found a little bit the same with me, that with Ted Rogers, there was the spectrum on which anything you would do could fall, which is too early or too late or too much or too little. And you had to try to hit the bullseye right in the center as between too early, too late, too much, and too little. So I'm sure, Kevin, that you found the experience of coming over here and having these meetings, you probably thought you were back in those days. But you know what? If you look at the path that has been followed over the time that you've been the CEO, and of course you had involvement with the company other than that, just the fact, for example, that we've worked together with my council, put a funding structure in place that I think brought an end to this continuous uncertainty that existed for a long time before that on both the capital and the operating side, as an example. Secondly, it's one thing to undertake a kind of study the way that Senator Art Eggleton did for us, in terms of something that very clearly said we had to reorient the sort of structure and operations and culture of this place to place the tenants first. It's one thing to have that report written. It's another thing to actually begin to implement it. And if you look at, again, the work that has been done with a long way to go, I think we'd all say that. But nonetheless, the work that's been done to create the Seniors Housing Corporation, I'm really proud of that. And there's a lot of work to be done on that too, but I'm proud of the fact we can go back to a day when we can pay special attention and provide special supports to seniors and operate that in a way that I think will be better for the tenants. That's what it's all about. It's not about conveniencing ourselves. It's about the tenants. And the same with the new, I call it the sort of the decentralized model that there's a name for it. I know that I never remember these things, but you know, the model that has people being served on a more local kind of basis. And I'm watching with you at the meetings that we have had the indicators that show, because the proof of the pudding be how many nice emails we get. It's going to be the facts that speak to, you know, the reduction in elevator calls and how fast we respond to them and the general sort of living circumstances of people. But I will just say all of those things happen under your steady leadership, and you'd be the first to say with a really capable team of people that you lead over there, which I think is a team that has improved. And you came into the job not expecting to do so. I mean, quite frankly, and you served exactly as you said you would. And I think we're all the people that have gained from that, but more so than whether we have gained as a city, the tenants I think have gained, and it's all about them. It's all, and you know, we do have a lot of work to do. The last thing I should mention is the pandemic. Again, you know, we've tried our very best as a city, and I think we've set a standard that is quite high relative to other big cities. But I think we've also done quite well. If you look at the relative health of people in the Toronto community housing buildings and how they have fared, I think that, you know, certainly inside the buildings themselves, there are broader questions of equity with respect to communities in the city. But I think the Toronto community housing tenants have fared quite well because the corporation was prepared to be proactive in looking after the tenants. And I think that it's not been perfect for any of us in terms of the whole pandemic, but I think TCHC has done a very good job. So I will just say to you on behalf, I know of my council colleagues, and the ones that are on the board will speak for themselves, but there are, of course, a number that aren't on the board, a couple of dozen. Thank you for your public service. Thank you for your job well done at Toronto Community Housing. And don't be a stranger. We will look forward to you know, to staying in touch with you. But we wish you all the very best, and thank you very much for your public service. It really has been an extraordinary run, and we've got a lot done with a lot more left to do for the rest of you board members who think we can slack off once Kevin's gone. Thank you. Kevin, good luck. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship. I should note that Joanne has joined Kevin, so you have to behave. I don't know if the city manager wants to say a few things as well. Chris?
Sure, and so I'll be brief, but first I want to thank the board for giving me this opportunity. And you know, it's interesting. I've been with the city now almost 3 years, and having now worked with Mayor Tory and Kevin Marshman, I can understand why Ted Rogers and the company was as successful and remains as successful as it is. I don't think I've worked with two senior executives that are as deliberate in their actions and thoughtful in their questions and just really know how to run things. And so, I mean, I've benefited from being exposed to all of that in the time that I've been in Toronto. In my former career in Hamilton, I was for a period of time the CEO of City Housing Hamilton. So I actually understand a bit of what Kevin experiences. And one thing that separates the private sector from the public sector, and this is actually a report done by the Conference Board of Canada about 20 years ago, they basically summed up and said the private sector is about earning a profit and the public sector is about earning trust and confidence. And I can say, as a former CEO of City Housing Hamilton, I started the job, I knew absolutely nothing about it, but quickly learned that the role is much more than just looking after the bricks and mortar. It is more about the, you know, the hearts, the minds, and the souls of the people that reside in those buildings. And what strikes me about the two gentlemen I've just met is that, you know, they are very good at what they do. And like yourselves as board leaders, the focus is on the people. It has to always be on the people. And it just strikes me that, you know, I find myself in company with people who care deeply about those that are challenged in the many different ways in which they are. And over the time that Kevin has been at the helm, I love working with him. And I love the, you know, the work that he's done with the board to get you as far as you are right now. And there's some transformational work that has unfolded over the last several months. And again, Kevin has been nothing but thoughtful and very deliberate. And so really, to me, he is he is what a good leader is. And good leaders are more than just simply, committed and smart. It really boils down to their character and the way that they approach the work, the way they work with others, and in this case, certainly how deeply he cares about the people that are in the buildings that all of you look after. So Kevin's promised me to not give up on me. He's available to help and with whatever I might need from him. And so why wouldn't I access a person with that much experience and ability? So of course I will. And thanks, Kevin, so much for taking the role and being as successful as you have been.
Thank you so much, Chris. And look, personally, on behalf of the board as the chair, and some individuals may want to say things too, it's up to them. But look, it's been, an extraordinary experience working with you as CEO, through some ups and downs. But what's been great is as chair has been able to watch you, start and continue the transformation of an organization through some crucial changes, all focused on, delivering better service to our tenants, and you think about the changes that have happened in the short time you've been here in terms of, consolidating the management of the organization, reorienting the organization down to give authority to superintendents and the people closest to the tenants, to, helping bring about stabilized funding, to working on, the seniors housing initiative, to the development initiative. It has been, an astounding, but what was also interesting to watch you learn on the job too and understand the priorities of our tenants. And so the initiatives that you brought forward around equity, diversity, inclusion, confronting anti-Black racism, and, issues that, probably when you started your business career weren't as dominant as they are, and to watch you learn and confront and challenge and make us better as an organization has been an amazing lesson for me. So just personally, and as chair of the board, wanted to thank you for everything you've done. And we would be phenomenally lucky if in our search we find someone as good as you and where our fingers are crossed. So from my perspective and on behalf of the board, thank you so much for everything. And with that, I'd like to kind of
I would
applaud you.
Thank you. Can I say a few words, Jen, please, quickly?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Kevin, but I'd also like to thank Joanne, because when she agreed to give you up for another 2 years in order to take the helm at TCHC. So I really do appreciate her losing you for that time. And it's not, as she will tell everybody, a job where you're not immersed completely. So as a family, I thank you for taking that decision, because you've been a tremendous addition to TCHC. I think, Kevin, I remember interviewing you, Public Appointments Committee, when we were interviewing you for the TTC, and I said, oh my God, that guy is so great. He's got to go on the TTC. And then shortly thereafter, there was a reshuffle, because we needed a good member of the board at TCHC. And you were a great member of the board, good chair, and an excellent CEO. And I think a number of the competencies that you have shown, and what I'm just going to call the wingspan that a CEO has, are really critical for us to understand in selecting our next CEO. So thank you for that. You've shown by example what we need to expect and what we need to hire. You have really taken on the reorg. I thank you for that. Reorganizing for tenant management. You didn't do that yourself, but you and Sheila have been a great team. And I think it's a critical change for TCHC for that focus on tenants. You've embraced tenants first, even though you didn't start off like that, but you have, and you've pushed it, and you're driving it and implementing it. You've had a whole HR issue through all of our room in Tomlinson, and you've embraced confronting anti-Black racism. I hear from people in the corporation how impressed they are with your commitment to meet the challenges of anti-Black racism. So you've also done a lot with relationships with the city and the shareholder, and understanding those need to be very close and meshed relationships. So I just think you've given us great service. I thank you personally. I thank you and Joanne together for making this happen and wishing you the very best. And just ask you not to change your cell phone number. Thank you very much.
All right. I'm not sure how we end this, but but I do. Yeah, Councillor
oh.
Nunziato, I know the city manager and the mayor do have to go back to regular scheduled programming, and maybe Kevin might want to respond
Well,
to them
perhaps
just before that
if I could,
happens. Sorry, Councillor,
perhaps,
but
yeah, perhaps if I could just say a couple of words just in respect to their schedules. I think Mayor Tory, one of the things I need to leave, I think I might leave a letter that, I won't be so presumptuous as to be as important as the President of the United States, but perhaps there's value in me leaving a letter to to my successor. And I think the very first item I would put in that letter would be find out where John's stickler file is and take his chief of staff for dinner and make sure that it gets cleaned up periodically. Because that was good advice that we a good practice we had at the Rogers Corporation. Certainly, listen, it has been a very interesting experience for me, at TCHC, and I would be so just. I actually had a whole kind of prepared statement to kind of talk about how we had performed in 2020, which clearly is not what the purpose of this session was. And so I thank you for that ingenuity, Mr. Chair. I would say that I want to thank, and I recall kind of 2 years ago in a meeting with the mayor and with Chris and a couple of members of staff in terms of, the ideas and the plans that I had for this organization if I was going to step into this role. And here we are 2 years later, and I think we've largely accomplished that. And I want to thank both of you for your support and the candor and transparency that you have shown our corporation. We couldn't have done that if we weren't partners in that regard. I do, want to say that, one grows, life is a university, it's a continuing education program. And I think it's been pointed that, when I joined the board 5 years ago, I very much had a business focus, to it. I remember kind of looking, I was on the BIFAC committee with Councillor Bilo, and we kind of look, we got, what are the metrics around this and how do we measure? We ended up with something like 100 metrics, which was just insane, level of quantification for us to take a look at. But, and I think Chris said it best in one of the discussions that I had is that we are an equity organization. And so as I've come to understand that, the role that we play in supporting some of the most vulnerable in our community, has really, taken hold within me. And so I'm, clearly much more interested in how we can support our communities. And I bring that lens to the various things that we look at. These decisions are all, tough to make when you're having. I remember Joanne and I were on our way to Australia, when I'll call it this opportunity presented itself. At that point in time, the chair of BIFAC was calling me and saying, wow, we need some help over here. Do you think you can help out? And Joanna and I talked about it, for the better part of a week. While we were touring, Australia at the time, and I agreed that it was a family decision, and so we made the commitment for 2 years. And in some discussions where I've had with people who have suggested perhaps I could extend that, I said, you would think less of me if I didn't honor my commitments to you, and I take my commitments to my family very importantly. And so I do want to. Joanne, I am very blessed to know Joanne and have Joanne's support, and I will be glad to spend more time with Joanne, and I presume she with me as well when when I do retire on April 1. And in closing, I also wanted to take this opportunity to recognize the executive leadership team. We are truly fortunate to have such a talented, dedicated, passionate, and committed team. And quite frankly, they make my job as CEO easy. Well, okay, maybe not exactly easy, but I've been really fortunate to be supported by such a strong group. And as I reflect, on how this team has been transformed over the last 5 years that I've been associated with this organization. I'm really, really inspired and can say without reservation, and this is without exaggeration or reservation, that this is the best team that I've had the honor of working with. My guidance to the board is simple in this regard. Provide supportive direction to this team, and you will be amazed by the outcomes. And to the board, I would say that it has been my honor to serve you, and I wish you all the best in your journey forward. We are on a good path. And so thank you for this. This is truly touching to me. Thank you again, Mayor Tory and Chris, for taking the time out of your schedule to come and join this. And I look forward to our continued adventures as we move forward. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you, Kevin, so much on behalf of all of us. And I know your worship and city manager, you have other things to go to, but I really appreciate your attending and joining in our too brief and unfortunately not in person celebration of our CEO. But thank you both for coming.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Kevin. Yeah. All the best. Thanks to the board members.
Thank you. So if it's okay with the board, we'll return to our regular scheduled programming on our YouTube channel. Great. So I will now proceed with our land acknowledgement and normal remarks, and then we'll proceed with the agenda if that's okay with people. Is that good, Dara? We are ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Great, thanks. Wanted to start with our land acknowledgement, and we are holding this virtual meeting on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's also now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Just want to take a brief sojourn to say a few words about our colleague Barry Nowosielski. As some of you know, the long-serving member of the Investment Advisory Committee passed away earlier this month, following shortly after his resignation from that committee in December of last year. And I want to say on behalf of all of us that the Community Housing Corporation certainly benefited from Barry's breadth of experience in a wide range of issues around finance and government and accounting through an incredible career as an investment banker and a fund manager. In addition to serving on our committee, he was a member of the board of the Alzheimer's Society of Peel and the Alzheimer's Society of Ontario. And we want to obviously extend our deepest condolences to his wife, children, and extended family and loved ones at a difficult time. COVID-19, obviously continues to dominate all of our thoughts, and it's almost been a year since TCH activated its Emergency Operations Center. Our frontline staff continue to deliver essential services and connect students to supports, particularly in buildings and communities that have been hard hit by COVID-19 or which are at an elevated risk. And I think, as some of you, those on the board know, and some of the others watching, Toronto Star ran a front page story about how staff went door to door to tell isolated and vulnerable seniors about how they can get tested. And I have to say, it was encouraging to see those efforts recognized and know that people throughout Toronto could read about how TCHC is working with the city and public health and our healthcare and community partners to go the extra mile to support our tenants. So what I really want to do was, on behalf of the board, send a sincere thanks to all our employees for their exemplary work they're doing during the pandemic. During the public session, we'll hear a series of discussions about scattered homes and importantly, our strategy for confronting anti-Black racism. The strategy describes the changes we need to make to systematically address the realities and experiences of anti-Black racism across TCHC, both as an employer and as a social housing provider. It recognizes that real change must be realized in the experience of Black tenants and Black staff at TCHC, and that achieving that real change is a benchmark of success for us. The strategy arose from advocacy work done by Toronto Communities Housing's Black Staff Caucus in the wake of Black Lives Matters movement, and the heightened consciousness of social injustices faced by Black people worldwide that emerged after the murder of George Floyd and other events of 2020. The Black Staff Caucus hosted a series of healing circles last summer and engaged in dialogue with the executive leadership team and Black staff in management on how the organization can commit to dismantling anti-Black racism. In September 2020, TCHC established an internal Confronting Anti-Black Racism strategy team to lead the work. And from November of last year to January of this year, the team hosted more than 50 focus groups attended by more than 600 people, tenants and staff whose input and insights guided the strategy's development. The strategy is a reflection of a collection of the Black voices heard during the consultations. The solutions come from them as they experience the reality of anti-Black racism. We have allocated 90 minutes of this to hear deputations and the presentation, and I should say the board itself has also started the process of getting anti-Black racism training. We had a good session just a few weeks ago. Another item today, harm reduction policy, brought forward discussion. TCHC has developed that policy in collaboration with representatives from the City of Toronto and Toronto Public Health and Tenants. The plan sets out a vision for how we can deliver to help minimize the harm of illegal drugs in our communities and enable all tenants to enjoy their homes and the benefits of stable housing. I should say that we're also in the middle of, the city's in the middle of the process of renewing appointments on the board, so we're a bit up in the air in terms of who our membership will be after this meeting, including related to the tenant representatives on the board. So, you know, not quite sure what the city will be concluding, but I do want to, in that context, particularly thank Amanda and Uba for the service that they provided to this board and to the tenants in the community. You know, for over the last while, they've been a very important part of the board and advancing the views of tenants to us. And so I want to thank you in particular for your contribution and service to date, and I hope it continues. I also want to say, you know, it seems to be a bit of a board meeting of change, but it's also the last meeting for Linda Jackson, our colleague who is served the board for quite a long time and is stepping down after completing her second term with the board at the end of this month. She has been the long-serving chair of Tenant Services Committee, and as in that role has been an incredible leader for us at the board and a voice for tenants and frankly for the equity that Kevin spoke about that we need to provide. And so she's been part of leading the team of refreshing the tenant engagement system, dealing with the Office of Commissioner of Housing Equity, improving priority transfer process, tenant complaints, harm reduction policy, just an incredible record of service on top of, by the way, her full-time job. So I'd like to thank Linda for 5 years of service to us and most importantly to our tenants, and wish her the very best. I think with that, we can proceed to the formal agenda. Thank you, Linda. All right. So we have deputations. I think we've got, I should just note that we, you know, we're going to do our voting in the normal way. We have a number of deputations on consent agenda items, which I think as a result of that, we're going to, for the couple that where we have deputations related to consent agenda items, I think we're going to postpone those. Is that right, Dara?
I think
We
the
hold them
intention
so
is
the
to-
deputations can be, instead of just being
Correct.
kind of dealt with. Yeah. And so, so I guess, so that means, which ones does that mean we're formally holding?
2F and 2J.
Okay. Right, so there will, and there will obviously I guess I should first canvass the board for conflict of interest. Great, hearing none, thank you. And so then we're going to hold 2F and 2J. Do the directors want to hold any other matter?
I have a question on 2H.
Yep. You want to hold it?
Please.
Okay. Any others? Okay, can we get a motion then to adopt the consent agenda otherwise? Ryan, seconded by Debbie. All those in favor? Great, thank you. So do you want to talk to your matter now, Adele?
Okay, I wasn't sure if we were going in alphabetical order. I just wanted to understand the economics of this new lease. I understand that we shortened the term to save a $750,000 penalty, but it seemed to me the rent was going up and significantly. And then I was concerned if there is any risk that we may have to extend beyond the 3 years and what the rent would be in the third year. Or in the fourth year, sorry. I'm not sure whose matter this is, who I'm asking the questions of.
So Alan Murray, the VP of
Okay.
FM, will speak to that.
Okay.
I see Alan, but I don't hear him.
Alan, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I thought I had taken it off. Thank you, Sheila. I also have Noah Slater here in case there's any questions that I can't answer. But yes, the rent does stay the same if we have to stay later. We also have worked with Modern TO, and they've committed that they would have space for us at the end of this this lease, and we would move in with Modern TO at that point in time.
At the end of the 3 years.
At the end of the 3 years, correct.
Oh, okay, so there's no risk that you have to stay at the lease that we're discussing at this point. There's no risk that you'll have to stay a fourth year.
That's correct.
I
Okay,
think there's also renewal options, I believe, in the lease.
there are renewal options. Yeah, two 1-year renewals.
That's
Yes,
correct.
there are, but we would not exercise those, and we would move into the Modern TO space. And that's a commitment that we've also made to Modern TO as well.
Okay, because it seemed with the increase in rent for the 3 years, it was like over 600,000 in increased rent. And I just wanted to make sure that we were actually saving some of that 750. Okay. So
Understood,
the
yeah.
report makes it seem like we're saving 750, but actually it's just about 150,000. And I just wanted to make sure that there was no risk that we would be paying rent at this location for year number 4. And so you're committing to me that we're not, despite the options.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that, John?
Yeah, so there are 300 staff there in regular times. How many staff are working out of there right now?
Right now out of there's probably, I would say, about 80. Currently, there'd be some of the...
So there's 80 staff that go in there on a day-to-day basis every day?
Yes. It does fluctuate with the number of internal trades that we have, but there would be trade staff that we have that don't have the ability to work from home, and then there would be some other miscellaneous like there is client care that is there as well, and they currently don't have the option to work from any other location.
Okay, and is there so the rest of the people are basically working from home at this point? Yeah, there are 200 staff. Okay.
Yeah, there is a large percentage that generally are working from an alternate location like home. They may come in periodically depending on what's required, but there is a good number.
Is that posing any operational difficulties with having staff work at home?
No.
So is it possible that perhaps we have too much space if we're reserving space for 300 workers?
If we continue to be in the situation we are, then, yes, there is, we could look at reducing, but it's hard to tell at this point in time exactly what's going to happen. We also do have things that are stored there as well in terms of the space. So it's not just staff, but there is also space that's used for storage, for example, for our internal trades, for our heating service tech positions and plumbers and gas fitters and things like that. So it's not just all staff space.
So
and then we are.
Given the changed circumstances of COVID, many companies are giving consideration of permanently downsizing and working in this new environment that we've become used to. Has Toronto Community Housing given consideration to operating in this fashion as we are right now, just going forward and perhaps not continuing to lease as much space?
So John, the short answer to that question is yes, those discussions are going, and not only as it relates to the space that we have at Carl Hall, but also the space at 931, as you know, that ultimately will move to Metro Hall. I think the balance in this as well is not all employees are really set up well to work from home, and I think we need to acknowledge that they will do that obviously because of the terms, but it's not necessarily their ideal situation that they're doing it because of COVID. And there's a number of employees that have reached out, over the period of time to me and to others in the organization, kind of asking like, when can they come back and work in the office? So it's not a one size fits all, but it certainly does make sense. And I think it will better inform us. I've given more consideration to the 931 location than Carl Hall, but it will better inform us as to how we, ideally set up the space as a result of the experience we've had in COVID.
And it is a priority for the Modern TO project to consider alternate flexible work arrangements.
Is Modern TO being led by Create TO, or who's leading Modern TO? Is it city real estate staff? Who's doing this? Because I thought the whole idea. Anyway, Sheila, who is leading it?
So Sylvia Fraser, city staff employee, is leading Modern TO.
Okay.
It's CREM that's leading it. It's not Create. It is CREM delivering that and laying it. City real estate, John.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I can't remember, is that an approval or a information item? We need to probably move now.
It's an approval. I can put the motion up.
Okay, thank you.
So it's to approve the revised terms of lease for 35 Carl Hall and 1, 3, and 4 Downsview Park for a term of 3 years for a total rent, and authorize staff to take appropriate action.
Good. Okay, thank you. Someone move? Adele, seconded. Nick, all in favor? Thank you very much. I should, just before I realized that in all the excitement over our extensive tributes to Kevin, I forgot the part 2 of that, which was just a brief comment as part of the chair's remarks on the status, just some implications arising out of the status of our search for your replacement, Kevin. And as people know, we're seeking to, the high bar you set has meant required us to have a very comprehensive process. And so at this point, we won't be able to have a replacement prior to your expected retirement date at the end of March. And so during today's in-camera session, the board appointed Chief Operating Officer Sheila Penny to serve as acting president and CEO for the period after you retire and until we appoint a new one. Which we are well underway on. So thank you, Sheila, for doing that. Our expectation is her appointment, obviously because of the long experience and senior experience in the organization, allows for continuity and stability for our employees and tenants until that search is completed. Sheila's focus will be to sustain our mandate to improve the lives of tenants through the delivery of its 2021 strategic priorities and through ongoing response to the COVID pandemic in collaboration with the City and Toronto Health. And then upon Sheila's recommendation, we also appointed Senior Director of Business Operations, John Ankow, to serve as Acting Chief Operating Officer while Sheila serves as Acting CEO. I want to thank both Sheila and John for agreeing to take on these roles. The board is confident with the two of them in their roles, and the support of the whole executive leadership team. TCHC is in good hands. So thank you both for agreeing to help us as we serve our tenants as we complete our search.
So,
Mr. Chair, just wanted to confirm how we wanted to proceed. Did you want to proceed? Did the board want to proceed with the remainder of the consent agenda items that were held for deputations, or move directly to the CABR item, which is item 5, and then we'll return to the consent items later?
Yeah, I think I'd like to move to, so can we finish 3? Just our kind of formalities. And then I'd like to skip to 4 and come back to the deferred items subject to the board. I think we need to have, I don't want to run out of time for our discussion of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Strategy.
Just trying to line up the right deputants.
Understood, and that's, but I would really want to make sure we've got, so can we finish 3, and then I'd like to go to 5 subject to the board. And then come back to the deferred consent agenda.
Consent. Thank you.
I don't hear any major objections to the board. So can I get, is there any business arising from the meeting minutes or action items? No. So we need a motion on that, Dara? No.
Just a motion to receive.
Motion to receive. Brian, seconded by John. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. So if you don't mind, Kevin, I'm going to skip to anti-Black racism. We were sneaky devils. I know you probably spent some time preparing a report, but we apologize for that. We have folks in to talk to us about the anti-Black racism strategy development?
Yeah, I think we have some deputies on this, and if I can get Danielle to pull up, we've got a very brief presentation to take the board through the discussion. If you can just pull that up, Danielle, so we are set up for that. I will let Dara get the deputies on.
How many do we have on this one, Dara?
I believe we have 4 deputants on this one, and I can hear in the next room that we're just trying to connect with the first of the deputants that we have lined up.
Great, thank you.
Kaylee, is Ms. Ra able to join the meeting?
Yes, she's here. Hello, good morning, everyone.
Board member Zamani Ra has asked to depute on this item. Ms. Ra?
Yes, good morning, everyone. All right, so greetings. Let me start off by giving thanks to my elders. So they are those who came before me and whose shoulders I now stand on. I am here on behalf of them to continue to lend my voice in whatever way possible to advance the needs and abilities of the ones who follow behind me. I acknowledge and stand in solidarity with my fellow Indigenous peoples, both here and on Turtle Island and across the way, and to other powerful marginalized folks wherever they may be. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the board for listening to me. The last time I came here in 2020, and then before that in 2018, I cautioned you not to make me come here again and talk to you about considering to adopt an anti-Black racism lens for a third time. So thank you for that. I also want to publicly state my excitement, my pleasure, and utmost respect for both the long-standing history of advocacy and push that Black people and people of color have been doing since before this moment within TCH. And special mention to Evelyn Amponsa and Nadia Gouveia and the entire team of staff and students that worked together to bring us to this point. So Sophia, Brianna, Zainab, Kenisha, Stephan, Fisa, Vanessa, Charles, and Natalie. To do CABR work of collecting, evaluating, and presenting data while living in our skin is by itself a full-time job. On top of those ones, they may also have like director, manager, partner, parent, daughter, or caregiver of some kind to family and friends alike. To be both the subject and the object of what you are gathering evidence to present can be incredibly taxing and can take an enormous toll on all aspects of your health if you are not careful. And while I am here, because of the work you all have done, I need you to know that your rest is equally as critical as the work is to this journey. So hopefully you can take a little break soon because you deserve it, and build those breaks in every so often because we need it, and we need you healthy and whole. Evelyn, the people in my community are still talking about the conversation we had, so thank you from the bottom of our hearts, which brings me to the point of my message to the board here today. This is the part of the journey where we, the people, pause. We pause to see what TCH board will do because this is where the heavier lifting actually begins. The pause is where we, the powerful oppressed, the powerful marginalized, determine how we need to move. Your decision today helps us clarify what we need to do and which way we need to go to continue our navigation towards equitable outcomes, because make no mistake, we will always be pushing. We'll be pushing for the right thing. We always will be pushing for justice and to claim our right to be and to thrive. Adopting the CABR strategy today would send a message from TCH to our partners or the people that it works with, like unions or other social housing supporting agencies, that the people we serve are in need of and deserve proper action now. To conclude, I think it would only be fitting, since we are in Black History Month and since Brother Malcolm X is one of my all-time favorite people, I'm going to read a quote about his view on progress, end quote. Sorry, quote, "If you stick a knife in my back and pull it out 6 inches, that's not progress. You pull it out all the way, that is not progress. Progress is beginning to heal the wound that the blow made in the first place." We, end quote. We, the powerful ones on the outside, have felt the blows. Some of us have transitioned from this life because of multiple blows. As the board of the nation's largest housing provider, addressing this wound by adopting the CABR strategy is the progress we are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the comments for the deputy?
I'll just thank you, Zamani, and I'm glad that we finally got, so you don't have to come back again, but you'll come back again to discuss the whole thing. But we thank you for that.
Absolutely, Ashe. Thank you for that quote. And yes, keep holding us accountable as we roll this out.
Most definitely.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate your deputation. Dara?
Mr. Chair, the next deputant is Nasra Mohammed. I believe that Nasra is on the line.
Hello, hi everybody. I come as a resident from Jane Fairgrove. I'm here to support the push for the implementation of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism strategy. Anti-Black racism in Toronto has traumatized our communities. It has criminalized, segregated, and withheld resources. TCH on levels demonstrates how racialized poverty is not properly tackled and needs dismantling. CABR strategy allowed tenants to share their knowledge with a series of workshops facilitated by other residents. As a facilitator, I have witnessed fellow TCH residents be the experts on best practices they want to be implemented. They discussed experiences with relocation, maintenance, quality of units, policing, and lack of recreational spaces. The CAPR strategy has also presented how tenants have lost trust for these projects to actually follow through. Community knowledge should not be extractive in nature. What this means is to follow through with no endpoint in mind. This initiative should be continuous to have a transformative and sustainable outcome. Now is the time to unwind the damage that has been done. We cannot combat anti-Black racism without addressing policing and hypersurveillance of our community. Why must policing have to start at our own home? It is very problematic that youth in the community have to face the community safety unit before Toronto Police. These interactions subordinate people and contribute to the lack of safety. CAPR strategy demonstrates ways we can actually reimagine what safety looks like to us. The reviewing of the CSU budget may help sustain the model of community programs funding stream. This includes compensation and creation of spaces which will increase capacity for us to handle ourselves. I ask the board to adopt the CAPR strategy to provide some agency to community and Black staff in dismantling systemic racism in TCH. Thank you for your time, and also thank Evelyn and Zamani for what they said, and all community advocates. Once again, I come here as a resident, so yes, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nazra, and thank you for being a facilitator. Any comments or questions for Nazra from the board?
I do have a question, Mr. Chair, and I should have asked Zamani this. I just wanted to hear more about the process of engagement of tenants in developing the CAPR strategy. And I don't know if Zamani can also comment on that. I think it's pretty important, the things that you're talking about. That's my first question. And then back on that, I'm wondering if your committee, if it is a committee or what the process is ever talked about the violence reduction plan that the board passed in relation to community safety and anti-Black racism, or if you've had a chance to comment or review it at all. Those are my two questions. And thank you for your service on the committee that you're going to tell us about.
Hello? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that for Nazra?
It was.
Oh, it's for me? Okay, well, I'm speaking as like a youth facilitator. So my perspective just comes from like just facilitating with fellow residents, right? So I don't really have too much input into like the structure and how they actually organized it. I myself just invited people through my network and like in terms of my friends, family that are in the community, or people that know one another that will speak to these issues and like share our experiences. So I'm not really too, I'm like being honest here, like I'm not too knowledgeable on the actual, like Evelyn and sure Zamani might know, but I'm just speaking from that point of view. So thank you.
Thank you. Debbie?
Thank you. Do you believe that the strategy adequately addresses your concern around community safety and the response from TCH?
Nazra again?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I actually do believe that, because community safety okay, so I think our approach to safety right now is more policing and surveillance, but once we understand that safety and the reason why we have issues is not because of, is not completely needed to be handled by policing measures. It needs to be handled through like holes and like roots to the issues, which equals like employment or opportunities for youth, space for youth, because once we have a lot of things to do, once we have a lot of people have eyes on the streets, once we have community completely engaged and have somewhere to operate with like proper funding, like we'll see better results. And like, this is beyond TCH. There's so many levels to this, but like this is where I'm speaking from, and I think this is a good step, because we have a lot of our programs have expiry dates that don't really have like pilot projects, and there's not really like a continuous type of approach to this, and we need to like continuously work with community so we can have best outcomes. So this is like, I cannot answer this question alone, but like it has to come from like many different sources. from us.
Thank you. You did a great job answering the question. I'm not sure Zamini's on the phone.
Sorry, hang on, Debbie. I had Amanda.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, I just like to thank Nazra for her deputation and for all the work that she's done so far. All the work that she's done in the past in the Jane and Finch community. I've had the opportunity to work with her, and I just like to say I appreciate all your initiatives, Nazra, and you're doing a great job. And I look forward to working with you on projects such as this one in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay,
And to address Director Douglas's question, unfortunately, Zamani's no longer on the line. But we have the next deputant is Natalia Hunter-Young. Is Natalia
Hi there.
on the line?
I am. Can you hear me?
we can.
Yes.
Please proceed. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So I want to echo the thanks that were given by the previous deputants. I won't repeat the names, but I want to echo the thanks because that's an incredibly important work and that was taken on by those people. My name is Natalia Hunter-Young. I'm a PhD candidate in the city of Toronto with expertise in the criminalization of Black peoples in North America. I wanted to speak with you today to confirm that the strategy is an important first step in remedying the TCHC's long-standing failures when it comes to providing safe and adequate affordable housing to its Black residents. But particularly, I wanted to speak to you because about recent developments as a result of, recent developments with the Toronto Police Service. Yesterday, the Toronto Police Service extended to the TCHC's so-called community safety unit officers to conduct warrantless searches of residents' homes for illegal substance. I want to repeat that. Warrantless searches of residents' homes for a legal substance called cannabis. Should these officers claim to find more than a legal exemption, they will have the power to immediately bar residents from their homes. This is a definitively anti-Black development that will ensure the continued criminalization of Black residents, given what we already know about how policing works and how police carry out racial profiling in Toronto, despite ongoing advocacy by Black residents of the city. I would like you to consider what it would be like for police to have the power to enter your home without cause, without due process, and without your consent, with the explicit intent to find something that they can criminally cite you for so that they can then permanently bar you from your residence. I want you to consider what that might be like in your home. Black TCHC residents live under constant surveillance and are an expected threat of police raid. I again would like you to visualize what that would be like in your home. Because Toronto City Council has failed to listen to the repeated demands of Black and non-Black residents of Toronto for safety from policing's violence, it is up to the TCHC to step in and protect its own residents, its own constituents from this reprehensible development. Adopting the TCHC's anti-Black racism strategy is an essential step, but one that means little if the TCHC continues to allow its CSU officers to be run by the rogue Toronto Police Service. Ask yourself if the property you oversee is TCHC property or the property of the Toronto Police Services. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
Tim, thank you for that, Natalia. I'm very surprised that we're just hearing this now from you as an external person to TCHC. I appreciate you bringing this forward. I absolutely agree with you that this new development is untenable. I cannot believe that CSU will be given these powers. I'm not sure, Tim, who from management can comment on this, but I would like some sort of comment from TCHC executive on when this decision was made and why hasn't the board been informed.
So maybe I can suggest we talk through with Natalia and then we'll follow up with management immediately afterwards. I've got Brian, Councillor Nunziata, Councillor Fletcher, and John.
Sorry, I think Councillor Fletcher may have some information for the board in relation to, sorry.
I
this
don't
is-
think so. I just have my hand up to ask her.
Yeah, no. Well, Brian,
I have some information because I'm on the police services board.
okay, but I have Brian first, so,
Okay.
and then we'll come to you, Councillor Nunziata.
Mine is more the discussion portion because I was wanting to know whether in fact we were involved in making a recommendation or whether the board could basically give direction to staff that we will not take on that.
Yeah, so can we deal with questions, Natalia, first, and then we'll do follow-up with staff on the issue she raised. Any other? John.
Natalia, thank you for bringing that forward. Can you please tell me how you found out about that information?
Absolutely.
And the source of that information?
Absolutely. Selwyn Peters is a lawyer in the city of Toronto. Yesterday he tweeted about this information in relation to, sorry, it may have been not yesterday. No, it was yesterday I saw it. It may have been 2 days ago. Anyway, it is in relation to the Cannabis Control Act, and I believe that came into effect. The police power extending came into effect yesterday.
So you found this information out through a tweet by a lawyer who was on Twitter?
That's right. Yeah. Someone paying attention to what's going on behind the scenes at the city. Yeah, that is how I came to this information.
And it had to do with cannabis seizures?
Yes, it's regarding the Cannabis Control Act, but it does sound like Councillor Nunziata has information on that she can provide you with.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing this to our attention.
Uba, do you have a question for Natalia?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing this with us. I'm shocked. I don't think it's fair for any police to go in anyone's house without proper warranty. And also, more importantly, the the constable's job should be less enforcement and invading people's space and more community development and supporting the communities.
Thank you. I agree with that, if I might respond. The only thing I would say in addition would be that there is an immense amount of power that you all hold as TCHC board to remove or revoke the relationship between the Community Safety Unit and the Toronto Police Service. Should you be able to do that, you will see a dramatic difference in the way that community safety is run across TCHC property, because it will no longer be run by the criminalizing intent of the Toronto Police Service itself. At that point, you can start to refashion the community safety unit's role vis-a-vis the residents of TCHC property and make it one where actually they are providing safety and not one where they are simply looking to lock people up and bar them from their homes.
Any other? Okay, thank you. So, Councilor Nunziata?
This report was on the public agenda of the police services. And the report was, we were appointing special constables to the Toronto Community House and TTC. And as far as the Provincial Cannabis Act, we referred that to the Anti-Black Racism Committee that we have, that is chaired by one of the board members, to their committee for comment. So that's the report. It was a public report. It's nothing done behind closed doors. It was in the process of appointing new members to Toronto Community Housing and TTC special constables.
So can I just clarify, Francis, is the depiction by the deputant, is that accurate?
We referred it.
So I'm not sure I understand what that means.
Is that a yes, Francis?
For comment, for a report
Well,
back.
It would be completely illegal.
Yeah, a bit, yeah, it doesn't seem right to me, but
It's against the Charter of Rights and everything. You can't do that.
Exactly. So it's incorrect. And the report that was on the police board agenda was to appoint new constables, right? That was the report. Then there was an added item on it that was part of that report under the Provincial Cannabis Act. And that is going back for a report to come back, and we referred that part of the report to the Anti-Black Racism Strategy Committee that we have at the police services for comments.
presume there's some enforcement mechanisms or powers under the Cannabis Control Act for non-compliance with its terms, I guess, and that you're asking for input on what that means for police services. Okay, all right.
Exactly.
So,
it's under the Provincial Cannabis Act, and so, yeah. And these are for special constables.
Okay, so just to be clear, the CSU doesn't have the authority to enter anyone's home at this, okay.
Not unless they're deemed special constables. I mean, that's all it takes. That's all it takes.
no, it can't be right. I'm sorry,
They
but
can be appointed. They can be appointed special constables and then be given the. I don't know why you are.
What I'll do is once that report comes back from the Police Services Board, I'll refer it to the board. Okay.
great. Thank you. Appreciate it. Anything else for this deputant?
I just wanted to be clear. I think that's a good idea for Councilor Nunziata to do that. That the deputant's understanding is that every special constable in Ontario has that somehow the Cannabis Act says that you don't need a warrant anymore. I think we need to hear more about the whole thing and how that relates to our special constables. I didn't know we were proceeding with adding more special constables, so that I'm a little surprised.
I'm actually, I had a question about that as well, Paula. I'm very surprised to hear that the Toronto Police is looking at appointing special constables to TCHC.
No, it's not
we
just
give them names, Debbie, to approve.
Not just
we
it's
advance
not just
them.
it's
Hang
not
on,
just
Francis.
Just a minute, Francis.
My understanding is that we are hiring them. There cannot be special constables until they're approved by the police, because technically, as we know, they have two masters, the TCHC and the police. They are not simply TCHC employees. They have a special category within policing that I don't think we understand too well.
Right, and I think
That's what we need.
but I think it's worth identifying that in our private session, we had something which I think it's well worth reporting. We discussed the issue of violent reduction, working with the city around a review of our community safety unit and including confronting anti-Black racism issues, and that what we as a board have asked our Tenant Services Committee to be engaged with that issue systematically to understand how we can be effective in the communities. We want information on how we're performing in a variety of different communities, those where mental health challenges are an issue, both where gun violence is common, and those occasionally where gun violence does occur, and those where there's less of it, and why there's a difference, and what we can do to be better at it. We've asked TSC committee to be seized of that issue, to come back to us at each board meeting to report on the progress, and as part of that to work with the city on the review it has on that issue. So we are, as a board, actively engaged in ensuring that we're on top of this issue. So I think it's worth highlighting that at this point for the viewing public. Adele, I saw your hand up, and then.
Yeah, I was wondering or hoping that we could get some more information. I'm not sure I understand the relationship between CSU and Toronto Police Services, and what is within our jurisdiction to control and what they have control over. And so who would report to the board? Because I find this very disturbing, what's been raised by the deputant, and I certainly would like to get more information. And I'm not sure who will bring that to the board. So I'd like to ask who could provide that at a future. Sheila, thanks.
Can I just clarify one more thing, Mr. Chair, is that just to ask, I guess in our I'll just tell the question I'm going to ask at the end of this. I had understood we kind of had a moratorium on the new hirings for CSU, so I just flagged that I'm going to ask that question, and if staff could please just be prepared to clarify that for us based on what, once we get to the discussion part. Thank you.
Okay.
And can I think Sheila volunteered to provide more information. I was just wondering when
Yes.
she would be doing that.
So as we discussed, we'll be bringing information through Tenant Services Committee on how we support community safety and the role of CSU in that support. We'll be doing that at the next Tenant Services Committee meeting. And I can assure the board that the special constable complement that was approved as part of the 2021 budget, we are not exceeding that, and we have 12 FTE on hold pending the review of CSU's role in community safety and support and the violence reduction plan.
As part of the information you're bringing forward to TSC, to Adele's point, will you also come prepared to clarify the relationship between TCHC and the police? I think we raised this the last time we got a copy of the CSU report to the police. I think it caught many of us by surprise then that our employees were reporting to Toronto Police. So further clarification will be greatly appreciated.
We'll bring that forward.
Yeah.
We have a memorandum of understanding that the board has signed with Toronto Police Services, and I can bring that forward as well.
I have Councillor Nunziata who's looking keen to speak.
As far as report coming forward, the report, when there's reappointments for the special constables, it always goes to it's been going to the Police Services Board for years for reappointments to TTC, Toronto Housing, University of Toronto. They all come to the board, and it's not adding compliments, reappointment to some of these members that you have. That's the process. So it's nothing new. It's been going on for years. So, I mean, if the board wants to report on what the board's MOU is as far as hiring the special constables in TTC or University of Toronto, that's a process. They have to go through the board approval first before they're allocated to TTC and Toronto Housing.
Okay. Do we have another deputant, I think?
Yes, we do. Kiana Bennett, I believe.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can hear you. You can proceed.
Okay, perfect. Hi, my name is Kiana Bennett. I am one of the individuals in the east end of the TCHC community that was responsible for conducting and carrying out CABR sessions. I carried out 2 sessions in the east, and I carried out 1 healing session earlier this month. So first, I would like to start by appreciating TCHC's acknowledgement of anti-Black racism on the property, whether it be through tenants, through staff, or with contracted members. I recognize that TCHC has moving this motion forward in order to hold themselves as well as the wider system accountable for acts of anti-Black racism that have occurred on the property and of tenants. So I just want to speak a little bit about some of the experiences in my session and what we talked about a bit in the East in relation to the CABR strategy. So the overall basis and consensus of the 2 sessions that we had, as well as the healing session, was that we really hope that the CABR strategy will, of course, address anti-Black racism on the surface level, whether it be between tenants, staff, or contractors. But we're also hoping that with the implementation of this strategy, that it will be able to really get to the root causes of some of the issues of CABR, of anti-Black racism, So that includes addressing the rampant poverty in TCHC. We do know, of course, it is social housing, it's rent geared to income, but looking at breaking that cycle of poverty that a lot of the tenants and their families are stuck into, and addressing the root causes of poverty, which could come from things such as employment discrimination or discrimination in other income support sources such as Ontario Works or ODSP. Also looking at hoping the strategy will work to address some of the violence that has occurred to folks living in TCHC as well as some of the staff. We do know, unfortunately, that TCHC is one of the communities in the city of Toronto that always has had a prevalence of violence, whether it be shootings or domestic violence. So we're hoping with this strategy put forward, we'll be looking at how some Black folks working and living at TCHC, how they have been impacted by violence, not only to just reduce the number of violence, but also to put forward initiatives that promote healing, looking at different ways to bring the community forward and address these issues. And lastly, something that was really prevalent as well in my sessions in the East was representation. So we really hope that this strategy will encourage TCHC to expand its representation, not just in, with frontline staff, but also in upper management and upper levels of TCHC. Sometimes, as a resident, when you tune into board meetings or when you just look at some of the meetings that are being held, whether you attend them virtually or in person, sometimes it's very discouraging when there's a lack of representation of folks that look like you. You feel like your voice is not being heard, and you feel like anti-Black racism is not being addressed, but rather it's being perpetuated. So again, having that representation on all levels of the TCHC platform, as well as TCHC working in collaboration with the City of Toronto, Toronto Police, different forces, our different systems in the City of Toronto to hold them as well accountable for confronting anti-Black racism, because we do know there's a lot of crossover and intersectionality between TCHC and other bodies, other systems, I should say, in the City of Toronto. So just looking to hold your peer systems accountable that you usually collaborate with them, and looking at how they address anti-Black racism, not only on TCHC property, but within their own system as well. So again, thank you for having me speak, and I appreciate TCHC's efforts to put forward the CABR strategy. But again, I just want to reiterate my point. We're really looking to get to the deep causes and the root causes of confronting anti-Black racism.
Great, thank you, and thank you for your efforts as facilitating sessions. Much appreciated. So any comments from directors? Paula.
I just wanted to know more about the sessions and how they were pulled together. And I see you're not a tenant, so tell me about your role there and as a facilitator and what zone you were in. Yes,
so
please.
myself, yeah, I guess I don't know what the title is, but I am a tenant.
You are, okay.
I am a tenant in the East. My sessions had about roughly 10 to 12 Black identified folks, many of who lived in TCHC in the East as well, some of who are former tenants, and some of who have never been a tenant but visit the property to see family or to see friends. And in a lot of their experiences, they share instances of harassment, whether it be from TPS, whether it be from TCHC constables. They shared stories of, discrimination that they face from neighbors, and that when they bring this up to, let's say, upper management or super at TCHC, they speak more of the lack of action that was taken concerning their safety and their comfortability in their own spaces. So the sessions were a really great chance for Black folks in TCHC to come together and share their experiences. And like I said, the very last session that I held was a healing session. So it's very important that when we're confronting anti-Black racism, we ask folks to speak about their experiences, and we ask folks to share their narratives and share their stories. But it's equally important that we provide spaces and opportunity for folks to heal and for folks to recognize that moving forward, we're creating safe and inclusive spaces where they no longer have to be re-traumatized or reharmed.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments for Kiana?
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it and your continuing efforts.
Thank you.
Ms. Bennett is our last deputant on this matter.
Okay, thank you. So we can, I guess, proceed to the formal deck and presentation.
All right. Thank you, members. Danielle, if you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Good afternoon, directors. Our team will now take you through a brief 7-page presentation that will summarize and help guide the discussion, after which we will open the floor for questions. So I just wanted to set us up. This is a relatively short presentation. The Confronting Anti-Black Racism strategy in front of you today arose from a groundswell of Black staff and tenants in the wake of the events that took place in Toronto and elsewhere around the globe in the spring. Subsequent to those events, we held a number of healing sessions with staff. The output of those healing sessions and the discussions with the Black Staff Caucus and also Black leaders at TCHC led to the establishment of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism strategy team, and their mandate was to develop a strategy for the organization. The CABR team has been, as it has been noted, consulted with more than 600 tenants and staff through focus group sessions that engaged 3 audience groups: an all-staff group, a Black staff group, and a Black tenant group. Over 52-hour sessions and small group consultations were conducted in November and December of last year, and numerous one-on-one sessions were held with current and past staff at TCHC, as well as tenants. After hearing from staff and from tenants, it was clear that TCHC had fallen short in addressing the realities of anti-Black racism in our communities and as an employer. The strategy was developed specifically to address a series of issues that have long contributed to anti-Black racism at TCH. In providing direction to the team, I made actually only 3 requests. That they first be deliberate in their research to get to the substantive issues below the surface, that they be forthright and candid in their assessments, and that they not compromise their beliefs. What you have in front of you today reflects that guidance. It is a frank report that perhaps challenges some long-held views of some individuals. TCHC is not alone in the issues that it faces, and nor are we unique in our historical challenges with regard to confronting anti-Black racism. Many of the issues that we face can be found more broadly in the community and in other organizations. However, the issues described in this report are ours to resolve. We own them, and we are accountable for changing outcomes. As part of our work, the team also researched the landscape of anti-Black racism initiatives in Canada and the United States and consulted with subject matter experts in Toronto to gather critical feedback on the work being done. The strategy is reflected in 2 parts. In the first part is an overview of the current state of anti-Black racism in TCHC, and it is explained. And the second part is the recommendations and the outcomes put forward in the strategy. I have to say that this is probably one of the most, in fact, it actually is the most inspiring pieces of work that I've had the honor to be part of. And I do want to recognize and thank the many staff, the many tenants, and the many community advocates who helped bring this to life for us. I'm now going to turn it over to Nadia, who will take you briefly through the situational analysis on the next slide. Nadia?
Hey, Kevin, just before we do that,
Thank you, Kevin.
can I get Sheila to maybe mute herself or whoever? Someone's making a lot of noise in the background there.
Okay, so I'll start. Over the past decade, concerns over financial oversight and accountability at TCHC were addressed by a variety of reports and reviews. These reports and audits led to changes that unintentionally produced a move away from a community development approach to service delivery to a more corporate top-down approach focused on risk. The current restructuring of TCHC to a decentralized service delivery model attempts to address the challenges the previous model held, but the effects of previous decisions are still being felt by tenants today. There are traditional risks that landlords must manage. However, as a social housing provider, TCHC has additional risks to consider. TCHC must also think about social and political risks, for example, the effects of poverty, community violence, or funding restrictions by various levels of government. Anti-Black racism must also be seen as a risk and threat that impacts how our tenants and staff experience TCHC. TCHC's approach historically has been colorblind, and as a result, anti-Black racism is embedded throughout our organization. Taking a colorblind, neutral approach to our policies and systems assumes that all tenants and staff have similar experiences of the world and therefore can be treated equally. Understanding anti-Black racism and its detrimental effects will mean developing policies and procedures that manage anti-Black racism as a risk and recognizes when we are unintentionally creating further harm for Black tenants and staff. I'll turn it over to Evelyn, who will walk us through what we heard.
Thanks, Nadia. Sorry, I'm just having some difficulties with my camera right now, so I'm just going to be off camera, but I hope you all can hear me. I want to start off by just thanking the staff and tenants that participated in all of the sessions that we held. I'll speak a little bit to how we kind of came up our engagement process, particularly with tenants. So one of the things that we did is we worked to leverage community relationships and understanding, that there's a historical relationship between tenants and TCHC, where tenants have felt that their voices have often not been heard. We didn't think that we would get the most honest or maximum engagement by us trying to do the engagement with tenants. And so we leveraged community relationships and community and other tenants who we know could mobilize other tenants. And so folks like Zamani and Kiana were part of that process in terms of us just engaging them and allowing them to use their relationships to hold these sessions. We provided them with a case study booklet that helped them to facilitate the conversation. We also offered folks the opportunity to do a brief training with our team if they hadn't facilitated a conversation before, or if they needed support via like WebEx or Zoom or using those kinds of platforms. The other thing that we did was to offer community healing sessions, because one of the things that often happens is we ask Black people to talk about their traumas and their experiences, and we often leave those wounds, just open. So we wanted folks to have the opportunity to be able to have healing sessions that we weren't a part of. The healing sessions were for community only, so that whatever happened in those sessions didn't come back to our team. Those sessions were specifically for community. And so in terms of having the different conversations that we had with staff, for example, they had a similar process where we utilized a case study process where we had various case studies and staff were asked to give us feedback on the case studies, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that came out from all of these conversations were the different ways in which Black staff are asked to negotiate harm. And what we mean by that is that staff working in a corporation with particularly front-facing staff who are providing services for people that look like them, there's often an assumption that because you're a Black person, you will support another Black person in a way that's meaningful. And while staff want to do this, it becomes difficult when they are asked to enact policies or procedures that might be harmful to tenants. And so staff are constantly negotiating who's being harmed in terms of either themselves, the tenant, or other staff. And that was something that came out very largely during our sessions. Another thing that we heard in all staff sessions, not just the sessions for Black staff, was that all staff feel there's no place to turn when issues of racism appear, when they want to support their colleagues, or when staff even want to raise issues, things that are happening to them. They didn't feel like there was a mechanism that allowed them to raise these issues. They also spoke about the management not being, having the proper skill set to be able to support staff when they escalated or raised issues of racism and anti-Black racism. Black staff specifically also felt unsupported in terms of growth and professional development within the corporation, and wanted more opportunities for mentorship, but also more opportunities to move up into, senior positions, which then spoke to the lack of representation that staff felt that was represented in senior management or the executive leadership team. Another major theme that came up in the sessions was HR. There was a need, staff felt a need that HR needs to rebuild the trust and gain the confidence of staff. So staff spoke about some historical relationships and some things that have happened historically that broke the trust that staff had with HR. And they really felt that as a part of this strategy, that trust needed to be rebuilt because oftentimes it impacted Black staff more negatively. You can go to the next slide. Thank you. And then when we heard from tenants, in all of our sessions that we conducted, there was the sentiment that tenants felt over-policed by CSU. The sessions that we did for tenants were only Black tenants, and that sentiment was there throughout all of the sessions. Tenants also felt disrespected by staff who lacked cultural awareness, with experiencing different things such as repair people or supers stepping on their prayer mats when they enter their units, or not understanding when they faced racism from another tenant and they tried to raise that and the staff person didn't understand it, or those kinds of things. There was also a lot of discussion about the lack of meaningful responses to the state of the community, the differences in experience between the different Revite communities. Lawrence Heights residents really showed up and talked about their experiences around Revite, and some of the difficulties that they faced there. They had actually started working with and trying to collaborate with Lawrence Heights Revites folks as a way to, help them to navigate these processes as well. So that was very interesting to hear. And, of course, the gun violence and the violence that happens in communities came up, and there was a need to think about what community safety looks like within the context of experiencing violence from other people externally. And then also a need for programming. A lot of tenants spoke about, particularly people that grew up in Toronto community housing, spoke about growing up and remembering the after-school programs that were run by Toronto community housing, or the different kinds of initiatives that they could take part of growing up. And now for their children, those kinds of things don't exist, or they're very minimal. And so they wanted to see a return to that kind of approach. There was also, they felt that there was a lack of advocacy against policies that had anti-Black racism implications, which means sometimes the TCHC has to, because of external things, either coming from the city, municipally, or federally, or provincially, TCHC had to enact some policies that may have anti-Black racism implications, and they wanted TCHC to be able to advocate against those policies when they were harmful to Black tenants. And then the last piece is around constraints around the realities of anti-Black racism in Toronto community housing. So poor mental health, direct racism, and lack of investment into communities. The one thing that I want to say is when we talked to both tenants and staff, when we revisited tenants and staff with the report, once we wrote it, there was a general sentiment that the report was able to articulate and give language to a problem that a lot of folks had been grappling with for a long time. I've had CSU officers actually reach out to me and say that the way that we talked about community safety helped them to think through some things that they had been trying to figure out for a long time. And I thought that was really interesting. We got really positive feedback, because once we developed the report, we actually went back and reported to staff and tenants, and the feedback that we got was very positive, very hopeful. And I want to thank the tenants and the staff that participated. I think the report is really a reflection of the brilliance that we heard from tenants and from staff, and the solutions came directly from these communities that we spoke with. So as much as I would love to take all the credit for the report, I can't actually do that, because the brilliance really did come from community. And I just wanted to end with saying that, and I'm going to pass it back to Nadia.
So we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. So we have an 8-point plan in terms of the outcomes. So this is explored in the document. So decent and fair housing, meaningful economic investment, healthy children, youth, and families, access to culturally responsive health and mental health services, community-centered safety, divesting from police culture. And I want to focus here a little bit because we spoke about divesting from police culture and policing culture. And we don't want that to be misconstrued with divesting entirely from CSU. That isn't what we heard. We heard a lot of calls for change and a call for re-looking at community safety, but not necessarily getting rid of CSU. So I wanted to flag that there. Creating uplifting social support networks and addressing anti-Black racism throughout the company through a cultural redress. So next slide, please. So one of the major recommendations that we are coming for today is in developing a center. So the Center for Advancing the Interests of Black People aims to lead sectoral change and shaping the discussion around housing policy and race. The center will drive innovative responses towards confronting anti-Black racism and all forms of discrimination and prejudice. The goal of the center is to transform the operations and experiences at Toronto Community Housing and lead the sector in defining the experience of social housing for all tenants. The center's work will be primarily concerned with the experience of anti-Black racism. However, the center should and will evolve into a space that is able to respond to all forms of racism and discrimination, including anti-Indigenous and anti-Asian racism. We are also hoping to work with tenants and staff to determine a name for the center that reflects their vision. The center will support TCHC to design strategy and work plans, oversee the implementation of these work plans, foster accountability and oversight, conduct strategic training and coaching, and lead capacity building, public education, and investigations into human rights issues through an anti-Black racism and equity lens. The team will also advocate and communicate on behalf of the strategy and implement an oversight network made up of both staff and tenants. We are optimistic that developing such a center will not only create a space to hold TCHC accountable, but will create proactive and preventative approaches to combating racism and discrimination in TCHC. Together, the strategy and the center will move TCHC to a place where anti-Black racism is dismantled and TCHC becomes a safe place for all Black staff and tenants. Over to you, Kevin.
Unmute myself. Thank you, Nadia. And just if we look at next steps, in order to execute the strategy, we'll develop clear, concise, measurable work plans with every division. And I want to kind of stress that this is not that the Confronting Anti-Black Racism team or the center is going to develop the strategy. This is a full team effort in terms of the implementation of this work. We'll develop a dedicated staffing structure and terms of reference to establish the Center for Advancing the Interests of Black People. We'll continue to maintain anti-Black racism training amongst all levels of staff. We propose to report to the board semi-annually, and we'll commence our first report in the third quarter of 2021. And we'll look to establish an accountability oversight group composed of Black tenants, staff, and service providers. I was asked by one of the board members in terms of, could we tell, how much this was going to cost TCHC to execute? And our preliminary budget, and it's one of the things that we need to work on over the next quarter to flush out, is about $2.2 million. And so I thought I would share that with the directors before we moved on to questions. And so that concludes our presentation, and I would like to now open the floor for questions from directors.
Thank you, Kevin. Can you move it back to full screen? Yeah. So any questions, comments? I see John, Debbie. So John?
Yeah, so thank you very much. Actually, Evelyn and Nadia, one of my questions was going to be how TCHC's inactions and actions contribute to anti-Black racism, but you covered it off very well in the document. And I don't know if you saw it yesterday, but in the Globe and Mail, there was a lead story about anti-Black racism in the York Region Police Department and how a number of police officers had been denied promotion. They'd been questioned about who they were when they were working undercover. And they really felt that their viewpoints and their voices were not being heard. And, to me, The story wasn't shocking and it wasn't surprising, and I guess that's a statement of really where we are. But I'm glad, and I credit to Kevin and the staff for taking these steps to address the issue. I guess the question that I would have, and Natalia, I guess it's to you. What will success look like once once we're working on these processes and procedures and re-education, if you will, for a period of time?
So for us, I think initially a lot of the thinking was around developing a strategy with sort of an action plan and have a checklist. And I think we really focused on the 8-point outcome plan for that exact reason. So we will know we've achieved success when tenants feel that they have safe and adequate housing, when tenants feel that there is a cultural redress, when there's a change in policing culture. So those are the 8 points that I think we really wanted the document to focus on. So the hope is that all of the, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, and so I would ask you, how are you going to measure that? And then also, what about staff? How will you know when you're being successful with the Black staff on board at TCHC?
So I'll answer the last question first. One of the things that we want to do is a survey around confronting anti-Black racism with staff. So right now we're undertaking a staff survey, a general staff survey. So we thought it would be best for the report to be put in place and we do a check-in in about 6 months. So we want to do that. The other place that we hope to hear from staff is through the Oversight Committee that will be overseeing the center. So that will be made up of staff and tenants. So we're hoping for that to be a mechanism for us to be held accountable through the center. So staff will be able to access that and share information. In terms of measuring success, we're going to be coming back to the board in about 6 months with very clear action plans and what the measurables and deliverables will be based on each of the 8 points. So again, we wanted to stay away from that because we really wanted the document to be embedded in the reality and the pain of Black tenants and staff and focused on major outcomes. But we're absolutely committed to tangible, measurable outcomes, and that will come back in the next time we see you.
Sorry, Tim, just one more question.
That really quickly. I just wanted to add that we're also going to try to work towards our data collection process, as you saw in the document, in terms of human rights data, and using the data in order to establish a baseline that will allow us to then track what change looks like. And so in order for us to be able to really measure the impact of the strategy, we do have to establish a baseline. And so as you did see in the document, there is one of the strategies for change is the human rights data collection. And so that the purpose of that is to allow us to be able to establish a baseline so that and then develop an evaluation around that baseline so that we can measure what the changes will look like and how we're moving towards success.
And lastly, Tim, if I could just ask one last question. What, in terms of numbers, what percentage of staff identify as Black and what percentage of tenants identify themselves as Black?
So I'll answer the staff piece. So based on the HR and previous staff survey, I think it was 12.5%. But that wasn't necessarily accurate. We don't have accurate numbers. I think that came up in the Toronto Police Services Board meeting as well yesterday. So I think we need to take a look at that again to see where we're at. In terms of tenants, I believe we have a stat, and Kevin, you could speak to this probably more than myself, where it's close to 60% of tenants identify as racialized, but it's not broken down by race. So one of the things, to Evelyn's point, that we really want to do and start to capture is race-based data and how we could use that to inform our decision-making. We weren't able to do that within the 6 months, obviously, but it's a commitment and the strategy for us to look at that and how we do that as a company.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, I think I saw Debbie next.
Thank you for such a comprehensive report. Congratulations, Kevin, on moving this forward so quickly and doing such putting such a good process in place. I appreciate the fact that you centered tenants and staff and reported back to them before this report came to us. John asked many of the questions I wanted to, especially around the data and data collection piece. So looking forward to hearing from you in Q3 in terms of your benchmarking. In your report, you talked about sector leadership. This is a scope question. What do you mean by sector leadership on these issues?
So I'm going to ask Evelyn to chime in on this, additionally, but I'll just kick it off, Debbie, just in terms of, TCHC is in a unique position. It's obviously the largest social housing provider, in the largest city in Canada. And so it does kind of put us in a unique position to be able to be thought leaders, in moving this forward. Certainly some of the work that we are doing, as we start to examine and actually reflect on our violence reductions or specialized communities, if I can look at that, and consider what we should be doing different, for example, in communities like Lawrence Heights, and those sorts of things, I think will naturally lead us to be able to, get engaged in complex problems that perhaps other organizations don't. And in the same way that we've led in some of the other initiatives we've taken, I think we could do it here. But Evelyn, would you like to add to that?
For sure. I think when I joined TCHC, one of the things that one of the reasons why I joined was because as Kevin said, I believe that as the largest social housing provider in the city, and in Canada, actually, we have a unique ability to be able to understand the needs of tenants from a social housing perspective. And so, which means that we can advocate for and speak about, as experts, the different ways in which we can improve social housing and we can improve the social conditions that exist for tenants. And our ability to learn from and to, even just with this report and what I learned from talking to tenants, I believe I'm more of an expert in social housing. I was able to have those conversations. And so I believe if TCHC is doing their work in a way where we are allowing tenants to guide how we do our we're getting that expertise and that experience, and then that doesn't just impact TCHC specifically, but also social housing sector at large, and the social housing sector at large. I was also thinking specifically about, for example, like CSU, and there are a lot of conversations around reimagining police and different responses, community-based responses to policing, and CSU can be that, right? If we reimagine that in a meaningful way, then that we can learn lessons that other safety units or policing initiatives can kind of learn from based off of how we do our work because of that unique position. And so when we talk about that sectoral leadership, it's really about using our position to be able to understand and provide creative, meaningful grassroots responses to tenants that the whole sector can learn from.
Thanks for that, Evelyn. I'm glad that you're thinking in terms of the leadership role you can play. One of the conversations we've been having at TSC is the absence of TCH in these sector spaces. TCH has not been active, for example, around ONFA and in other nonprofit housing spaces across Canada. Certainly haven't seen you there in the few times I showed up at the conferences. I'm so glad that you're thinking moving this forward. I have two more questions. Cultural redress, what's that going to look like? What did you hear from tenants in particular around cultural redress?
So one of the things that we heard, and this was part of the reason why we were thinking about the community healing sessions, because we're asking tenants to give us a chance to address anti-Black racism, but how do you do that without actually healing community from the experiences that they've already had? And so one of the idea around the community redress piece was to address those historic injustices, the pain that exists historically, the broken relationships, right? And so part of the work of the center would be to work with tenants to develop plans for different communities in terms of what that looked like. We heard loudly that cultural redress was needed, but we didn't want to decide what that looked like for all Black people or the whole community. We wanted communities to have the power to be able to figure that out for themselves. And so one of our next steps is to have interactive workshops with tenants where one of the things we were doing is we're talking about, this is what anti-Black racism looks like, and here's how maybe it impacts your lives, and so on and so forth. What does a plan look like that addresses those histories for you, for your community? And then not only just the different communities, but the different intersections that exist in communities, right? So We spoke to, younger Black people. We spoke to older Black people. We spoke to queer and trans Black people. We spoke to Black people from all different intersections, seniors, and we know that cultural redress doesn't look the same for all of those groups of people. And so we want to allow folks to be able to create that plan and work with us in order to really, just start that healing process. And so that the plan, I just don't believe that we can move forward without addressing that history. And so the plan, that cultural redress piece allows us to address that history and then move forward.
Thank you. We're looking forward to hearing about how you're moving forward with that at the board through TSC. Kevin, you talked about an oversight body that includes tenants and staff and I believe service providers. There's no place here for board oversight. Can you comment, please?
Well, I think certainly. I think the oversight committee that we were considering was one more operational as opposed to the strategic guidance, from the board. And certainly, it would, we see, the role of board oversight on this really is in the semi-annual updates that we were proposing. And the reason we picked semi-annual as opposed to quarterly as an example is, I think we can all appreciate that, anti-Black racism is a 400-year, event that continues today. And so and it's going to take us some time to actually make meaningful progress and then have a check-in point with the board. And so that's the view that we were thinking of, Debbie, in terms of how the board governance piece would work into it.
And Kevin.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah. So I had Adele and then Councillor Bilo, then Councillor Fletcher.
I just had a quick comment. I thought this report was really well written, and I wanted to say thank you and offer my congratulations to everyone who participated. And I'm actually really pleased that there's funds dedicated to moving this 8-point plan forward. I think that that's very important. So I was glad to hear that from Kevin, and I hope that will continue in the future. And that's it. I just wanted to say thanks.
Great, thanks, Adele. Councillor Bilo, then Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you. Kevin, Nadia, Evelyn, to everybody that's involved, thank you for the report. I think is really well done, and I think that the outreach that was done to tenants and staff, it comes through, I think, through the report, and so I appreciate that. Just a couple of questions. With regards to the area of economic prosperity, so are you going to be looking into things like our procurement, our hiring? So I would give more opportunity through that. Is that part of the things that when you talk about economic prosperity?
Absolutely. So that's one of the things we've already started to talk about in terms of really putting in place our updated social procurement community benefit agreement plan. So we flagged that with Sheila and Kevin, and they're incredibly supportive of that. So that will be coming.
Okay.
Actually, and if I could just interject, Deputy Mayor, the other thing too that we will be looking at this is through succession planning as well. So it's not just yes on hiring and yes on procurement, but also the individuals that are within the organization. Because while we have a large population that identifies as racialized, they tend to be lower in the organization, and they're, as you know, they are absent in the executive leadership team.
Yeah, makes sense. So the next update that we'll have for this report will have the budget breakdown, the KPI. So you're going to go into the 8 plan and kind of drill down on these things. Is that okay? Just a question around the center. You have a resolutions coordinator. Can you talk a little bit more about how you see that working and how you see working with how our ombudsman, the human rights, like how do you see this position working and working with other positions such as the housing commissioner at the city and so on?
So that position came about because one of the things that we heard from tenants, and one of the things that currently, actually not just tenants, but also staff, is that there isn't a mechanism right now to raise issues around like anti-Black racism and things that, and historically as well as currently, sometimes a human rights approach, contacting a human rights office is is inaccessible to a lot of people. Sorry, I'm just hearing an echo. Okay, yeah, it's inaccessible to a lot of people. And so what tenants said they would work for them and what staff also said would work for them is the ability to call directly and speak to somebody who doesn't then necessarily flag their concern or pass it on to somebody else, but actually has the ability to work through whatever the issue is with, through sort of a bringing other people together. So whoever needs to be involved in that conversation would be at that table. So that includes, for example, for staff, labor relations. It includes community folks if they need to be at the table. So that resolutions coordinator is a coordinator that would bring different folks to the table, including some of the folks that you mentioned, to be able to provide meaningful solutions to the different issues that people are having. And what we're imagining is that there'd be a resolutions coordinator that works with staff and one that works with tenants specifically. And so so they're almost like caseworkers, if you want to imagine it in that way, versus, just like an intake line. And the other part of it would be for the resolutions coordinator to have a transformative justice approach. And so it's not just a human rights legal based approach, but also one that is about restorative justice and transformative justice. If you have to work with your colleague who has said something racist or has, engaged in a microaggression, we need to be able to repair that relationship so that people can work together in a meaningful way. And so it's not just, so the resolutions have to be grounded in that restorative justice and that transformative justice piece. And so that's how we imagine that particular role.
Okay. And so I understand the case by case, but would this person be able also to then recommend things that need to be changed in a systemic way?
Yes.
Because I'm sure that through these issues, a
Yes.
lot of systemic things come through, and can we have some of these recommendations coming through to ensure that we fully get systemic change?
Yes, exactly. I think all of the positions as they exist, there is a part of it is an evaluation piece. Like, you need to be able to collect that data. What are the patterns? We need to be able to understand them. And even in terms of like some of the other positions, the goal is to be able to really understand what are the common things that everybody's dealing with, and then what are the specific things, right? And so that we can track that data. The center is set up in a way that also allows it to kind of be focused on research in a particular kind of way, not specifically research, but we know that if we're able to, really understand the trends and the experiences that are happening in a systemic way, then we can provide recommendations to what we're hearing and what we're experiencing.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks. I think Councillor Fletcher, were you next, I think? You're on mute.
Really great meeting today. It's all the batteries. I keep having to change devices because the batteries are running out. I just want to say, Kevin, I think you're right. This is on your exit. I just want to thank you so much for spearheading this, taking charge and making sure this happened. You didn't do it. You make sure it happened. I think it will be a crowning glory of your career in the most relevant way. So I just want to thank you very much. I'm interested in number one. I understand this report back in 6 months, but my experience is when something's getting up and running in this nature, it's very important to have that check-in more frequently. So I believe there should be a more frequent check-in board-wise so that we don't end up with the staff and the board in two different lanes or two different trajectories. And we find that on the CSU and VRP that we're often in two lanes and trying to come together. So rather than start like that, I want to make a motion, but I'm saying to you, Tim, and to you, Sheila, Kevin, and Dara, that I think that that's very important in the startup. So we're all on the same page. We're not trying to repair anything later, not the same understanding of what's going to happen. Critical. Number two, we have an HR refresh that's underway. I'd like to know how this fits. When we're talking about staff, there's two groups, there's staff and then there's tenants. But for the staff side, we have an HR refresh. I know at the city that part of the HR refresh is to actually bring on the roster groups or recruitment firms that specialize in recruitment of Black talent. So I think we need to have a very 360 view here. And even if we have a firm, maybe we have one firm or more than one firm when we're trying to make sure that we're capturing all the talent that's out there. So I really want to say that. I also understand that there's been some impediments that have been put in as far as kind of the hiring of tenants. This was always something that happened in TCHC. Tenants were hired into different jobs because we have jobs. And I believe that, and I think that would be important to look at, that are we still meeting that goal of starting people on good employment? Because we recognize that TCHC is a community of low income tenants, of poor, and it also have racialized communities. And in this instance, we're looking at anti-Black racism. So there's the layering of that and how our own employment policies need to be thoughtful, careful, and nobody gets cut off from employment. I'd like to see the revites added in here and how well we've done in spending so much money building bricks and mortar. Have we achieved what we should be looking for in revitalization of lives as well, including addressing those who have traditionally not had access to good jobs and now have good housing, but still poor? I also would like to ask you to give us an overview of how other large housing companies in the world that how they are addressing this issue of anti-Black racism kind of clearly, because I think we may be on the cutting edge of this and we should be tracking so we can share. I want to flag youth and hiring of youth and having pathways for Black youth to be hired and being thoughtfully done. And lastly, despite I have a story there I will share with you at another time, but also for the CSU, that's one of the lanes where we've had some just good back and forth with staff, but there's a certain budget with CSU, and there is what again is the role internally within the CSU unit. And you've covered it in here, and I want to thank you because we've been trying to grapple with that for a while. And then in the community as a whole for racialized tenants. So I'm sorry to take so long, but I think those are things that I really would like you to come back. And as I said, I think this needs to be at the beginning more frequent than perhaps after it's completely up and running. Those are my remarks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. I have Amanda Uba, Councillor Nunziata.
Hi, Evelyn. I'd just like to thank you and everyone who was involved with this report for such a thorough report. Also, I'd like to thank you as well for ensuring that the tenants' voices and their experiences were reflected in the recommendations and the strategy. I think it's very, very, very important and crucial and essential that the residents' voices are heard, especially in any decisions that we're making that are going to impact the lives of the people that reside in TCHC. So I just really like to thank you a lot for ensuring that the experiences of the tenants regarding anti-Black racism was reflected in the recommendations. And I'm optimistic as a resident who is Black, living in Toronto community housing, about the changes in the future regarding anti-Black racism. So thank you.
Great. Uba?
I just also want to say thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you, Kevin, and anyone else who support this initiative. And I think we came a long way, and I think we're going to the right direction. So I'm just excited to see all these great recommendations from staff and from tenants to be implemented, fully implemented. So, and I have a good hope for that. So thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Councillor Nunziata.
I also wanted to thank the staff for the report And also to say that yesterday at the Police Services Board, we also adopted a report that was carried. One of our board members, Ainsworth Morgan, is the chair. We formed a committee where we have 14 agencies, various agencies throughout the city sitting on this committee that will be reporting to the board monthly. So that may be something that maybe the staff want to look at to see what's happening there as well. I know that they are going to be connecting with Toronto Housing as well. So I just wanted to throw that out. And just to mention, unfortunately I have to leave because I have another meeting, so I apologize for that.
Okay, any other board member comments? So I think, is this a motion for approval or
I
information?
just want to ask, Mr. Chair, if some of the observations and
Approval.
requests that we've made will be considered, and
Of course.
we should forward all of those to the staff team and to the leadership.
I'm
Asking
sure they were taking notes as you
Yeah,
spoke.
but I seriously, not me. Everybody has lots of things that they brought.
No, I didn't. I agree.
And you said as you, so thank you. So I would like to make sure that we're considering that direction clearly.
As you is a royal you.
Oh, the royal. Oh, all right. Thanks, Tim.
Kevin.
Has his hand up.
Yeah, certainly. So I'm sure Dara, your team has kind of captured those and you know, so that we've got a laundry list of it. With regard to the reporting, there's certainly, you know, I can see us coming back in the next quarter, Councillor, and providing some further update on it. The only guidance that I would provide in terms of the frequency of reporting, you know, this is a substantial amount of work that needs to be done. And so I think as we start off, and I think it's good counsel, Councillor, you know, that we come back in a relatively short order and give you some directional ways in where we're going, and then we should get about doing the work. One of the things that, you know, when I was talking with Nadia, Evelyn, and the team earlier this week about it, in terms of, you know, my coaching to them, you know, moving forward, is that it would be very easy to head off in like 1,000 different directions on this, because there's so much work to do in so many areas, and that to be very kind of thoughtful and really kind of channel the energy so that you make progress, as opposed to the proverbial, you know, running around like chickens with their heads cut off, you know, sort of piece of it. And that's not to slow the work down. That's to actually make sure that it actually digs in and gets forward motion on it. And so those would be my only comments. But I you know, just want to let you know that we've heard what you've said, and you know, we will take those words to heart.
John.
Right. So Kevin, this is a great initiative. I'm just wondering, you did make a vague reference to a budget. Why are there no hard budget numbers attached to this report that we're being asked to approve?
Yeah, just very simply, John, because we wanted to get to the meat of the report. There's a lot of effort on it. I can tell you that, you know, Evelyn and Nadia are exhausted from the, you know, the amount of work that's gone into this. This was not a simple matter. I asked them to do kind of a rough, you know, a rough estimate of what the you know, budget parameters that we were looking at, and as I mentioned, you know, it's about $2.2 million on our best estimate. You know, assuming that we get, you know, board approval, and I'm fairly confident based on our discussion today that we will have board approval, you know, then we need to turn our minds to kind of flushing out the better costs associated with it. So we have an idea.
$2.2 million over what period of time?
It's an annual basis.
An annual basis. So, yeah. I mean, as a board member, I don't know how many staff that involves. I don't know at what salary.
And we can bring that forward to the board in the next quarter. I can tell you, I think it's, you know, memory serves me correct, it's roughly 17 staff. We have already, you know, we would look to identify efficiencies in the organization that we can fund it. I mean, we do have over $600 million in spending, you know, on an expense side that we do. So I'm sure we can find a couple $1 million to get this, particularly in this year, since it wouldn't be a full $2 million to get this off and running.
So I don't think that the city's anti-Black racism office is 17 people. I mean, one of the counselors could correct me, but I don't think it's anywhere near that large.
No, it's not, but it is primarily focused on policy, and it's also primarily focused on other organizations implementing it in terms of their plan. Ours is a very action-oriented plan, and if we need to make the investment, on it, and certainly, when you see kind of the roles and responsibilities of the various folks, and I might be off on that 17, but it's directionally correct. Then certainly the board can offer comment on it. But what we are doing is going much deeper than what the city's Confronting Anti-Black Racism team does in terms of action items.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm hearing a desire of the board to come back at the next board meeting with sort of a status update, but also in particular more information around, framing the budget and where it fits, where we're finding the money and how we're going to find the money and what the money is going to.
And can I suggest, Tim, to support that, that we have what the positions are and the roles?
Yeah, no, of course, yeah, a full kind of, here's
Can I just
a
clarify?
plan that attaches money and roles and functions to people, et cetera, yeah.
I just clarify with Sheila that because we held off the 12 CSU hirings, that we actually have some budget there that we could transfer. Can't hear you, you're muted.
We'll get it one day. There are gapping dollars there for sure.
From the not hiring. So we could say, we could tell you not to hire any other CSU officers without board authority and move those dollars to this project and then come back and look at the whole thing.
Yeah, although you might not, I mean, to be fair, I think the notion is to build a more permanent cabinet office, which funding from, which it may be the right decision on a permanent basis, but we should not make interim, we should not make temporary decisions about a permanent institution.
Which one? Which permanent?
The CABR office, right?
Yes,
I think,
but I'm making
right?
them
So,
about, yeah, I understand that, but we do have money because we have not fulfilled all those
yeah,
CSU.
but that is my point, which is those are on hold pending a review by us of the policy. That may or may not be a permanent. It may be a permanent. All I'm saying is I think those are.
John Campbell a little funding source.
Yeah,
That's
I
all.
understand, but all I'm saying is the one thing I've learned is government don't use interim dollars to fund a permanent institution. Otherwise, they're always in trouble.
Well, then I'll move we permanently don't fund the 12 positions. I'm happy to do that today too, if that helps.
That seems a tad ad hoc, Councillor.
Well, there you go. But you know what?
Well, why don't we just wait till next month when the budget?
Yeah, the whole point, we just spent a long time discussing a coordinated approach to the issue of how we're dealing with our CSU office. I understand you got a point of view. It may very well be the right one, but perhaps we should do some things systematically for a change.
Oh, I'm all for systematic. Thank you.
All right. So we have approval of the strategy with, I think, some amendments around coming back to the next board meeting, including with a budget plan development. And maybe you've been anticipating us, Dara, with any luck.
So
and so, Tim, if I could just say, I think the board wants an update, at its next meeting in terms of moving forward. I would still kind of leave the recommendations as it and add that one in as a separate one, and then determine forward.
Which, sorry, I guess, which means what in terms of?
Well, just in terms of, it's not necessarily at every board meeting that we're going to report on this, because we were thoughtful in our semi-annual reporting, but I recognize and I take Councillor Fleischer's counsel in terms of, as you're getting this off the ground, it's important that we make sure that the direction of the track is the direction there's alignment between the board and the directors.
Yeah, and the board, so that's fine. And so we can, and then the board can, if the board at the next meeting anticipates it wants more than semi-annual, it can adjust it at that point.
Exactly. Thank you.
So I've added a provision that simply requires an update on the implementation of the strategy at the next meeting. It speaks to establishing the center to develop and implement the center. I can add a provision there if the board requires.
I think we do.
Including a budget.
Yeah. So
something about budget.
Yeah, but I actually think it's authorizing the establishment, subject to, subject to reporting to the board at the next meeting regarding, budget, function, roles, and responsibilities.
Well, we can authorize the establishment of it, but then the funding and staffing levels can be confirmed at the next meeting, because I don't think we want
That's kind of what I'm doing.
Okay.
Yep. And I've spoken then to regular reporting with the intention in the longer term of a regular semi-annual report and authorize staff to take necessary actions.
It's good by me. Other board members okay with that? Can we get a mover of that? Adele, seconder, Nick. Sorry, that's all who I can see on my screen, so there may have been others. Apologies.
Sorry, let me take that down.
Eric, can you go back to full screen? Thanks.
Great. So all in favor? That's unanimous. Great. So, and thank you to all of you who worked on that. This is tremendous work and tremendous work to come. So thank you for what you've done and for what you're about to do. So very much appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I have to leave for another meeting, as I indicated at the top of them.
Yeah, no, understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair, did you, sorry.
I think we've got, so as I look kind of at our agenda, what we've got left, as I understand it, number 9, we can kind of deal with quickly.
Yes, we don't have any deputants in relation to item 9.
So can we, so I wouldn't mind jumping, because I think I'm trying to get to the approval matters in the time we have left. So can we do that? Is that okay? Brian? Do you have a...
Just gonna move that.
Okay, seconder? Linda? We've skipped right by it. All in favor? Excellent. So I think the next approval item is harm reduction.
6.
So I think and we have deputants on 6A.
We do. And I think the first listed deputant is Rhiannon Thomas. Is Rhiannon on the line?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Can you proceed with your deputation?
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. Thank you for having time for me here today. My name is Rhiannon Thomas. I work at the Counterfeit Harm Reduction Program at South Riverdale Community Health Center. Counterfeit has been providing harm reduction service to East Toronto, East York, and West Scarborough for over 20 years. I'm here to talk today about how important I feel it is and how important our program feels it is to adopt harm reduction policy at Toronto Community Housing. What I've witnessed and heard from my friends, colleagues, and our service users over the years is about the trauma of poverty and the cycles that can happen, the despair that people who live in some buildings feel due to violence that can be a result of poverty and is sometimes related to drug issues. That some people use drugs to help deal with this, and most do it very responsibly. And some buildings, and some of the buildings that we try to provide support in, people see, body bags going out on a regular basis, and people feel trapped, and they're terrified they're going to die of overdose. People feel scared all the time that they're going to get evicted, especially related to their substance use. And then once they lose their housing at Toronto Community Housing, there are not really any options left for people who are poor in our city. I've also seen people who are, targeted by Toronto Community Housing staff for providing and disposing of safe use equipment, but are often asked by that same staff to clean up used equipment. I've also seen communities in Toronto community housing buildings take care of each other, picking up food for each other, cooking for each other, providing harm reduction supports and supplies for each other, and cleaning up inside and outside of their buildings, and running to other units to reverse overdoses. We know how many overdoses are happening in Toronto community housing buildings, and we know that there would be many, many more if we weren't providing harm reduction services. If we can work more closely with Toronto community housing to train staff to respond to overdose, to train staff to understand drug use, and have community conversations about safety around safe disposal of used equipment, and even conversations about buying and selling drugs, because that's not going to stop, and we can't evict or arrest our way out of what's going on with drugs. But we can build on the strengths of individuals and communities. Toronto community housing knows and can assume that there are tenants that use substances. Toronto community housing can support harm reduction satellite sites instead of punishing or evicting people who are actually helping. It would be really helpful if Toronto community housing buildings had in-house harm reduction space, small offices with supplies and staff that can help with resources and supports. It would be incredible if there were naloxone kits available on every floor, just like fire extinguishers. And if Toronto community housing can support with neighborhood harm reduction agencies for support and resources, education, supplies, place of referrals for other supports. Toronto community housing could be openly promoting and embracing harm reduction so that tenants who use drugs are not scared to reach out to their landlord for help and support when they're experiencing difficulties with their units, like other people coming in and taking over their units. People are terrified to reach out because they fear they're going to be evicted or otherwise get in trouble with their housing. The evidence is clear. Harm reduction works, and we are ready, willing, and able to work with Toronto community housing to support residents, buildings, and communities to reduce the harms associated with the war on people who use drugs and save lives. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments from the board? Brian?
I'm very familiar with the work of South Riverdale, but I wondered whether you could also comment, would that be also true in the other, I mean, there's a whole network of community health centers that there could be a better working relationship between not just the ones you are located in the east end of Toronto, but across the city, because having access to great healthcare is so important for everyone, and especially individuals who are facing substance abuse issues.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I'm only speaking for South Riverdale, but I know from, doing this work for almost 20 years that my colleagues at other community health centers are eager. We're chomping at the bit, really, to be able to work more closely with Toronto community housing to provide these supports, not just for us to bring support to you, but also to be able to refer back to our centers so that individuals who are living in buildings can be better connected to a variety of supports.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members? No, thank you so much for your views. Appreciate it. Dara, do we have a couple of others, I think?
Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
Our next deputant is Nick Rondinelli. Mr. Rondinelli, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please. Thanks.
Thank you. My name is Nick Rondinelli. I am the CEO and owner of Heart to Heart First Aid and CPR Services, Inc. We are one of the largest Red Cross training partners in Canada with 18 locations across Canada. We provide training and certification courses in first aid, CPR, basic life support, professional responder, psychological first aid, and instructor development courses. We have been in operation for 21 years, servicing downtown Toronto East. We have provided emergency response training to thousands of healthcare providers and support workers in harm reduction, outreach, and community health centers. We also have provided extensive layperson training for staff in multiple shelters, Toronto Community Housing, and many more. Let's just say that we are a long-standing vendor for the city and community partners. When we look at this harm reduction policy, we must look and interpret these policies and re-examine definitions and key terms within these policies. It's imperative that we do this through the lenses of what's happening in our communities today. We can all agree that we live in completely different times, and therefore we must adapt and mold interpretations and definitions to the meanings of right now, the urgencies of right now. As I continue with my deputation, I would like to request that we all think about what harm reduction is. I strongly feel that harm reduction incorporates more than just learning about clean needles. No, it's about implementations of evidence-based standards and practices by way of education and training, but also includes credentialing and performance-based training and certification. By today's definition, harm reduction also means overdose prevention. It also means overdose resuscitation or first aid for narcotic poisoning. We can also define harm reduction as being able to recognize the signs and symptoms of a drug overdose and determining its severity and maybe even its cause. Harm reduction also does not just apply to primary care workers in community health centers or safe injection sites. It's not exclusive to healthcare providers or even emergency medical responders. No, it can't be, because today is different from last year and the year before. And what we know to be true is that if the term harm reduction is to serve humanity today, we must also incorporate low barrier support services like workers in shelters, respites, outreach, social workers, and yes, it may even pertain to workers in bathhouses, post-COVID-19, of course. In fact, any service workers who are at a higher risk of encountering someone having an overdose should be included within the umbrella of harm reduction. But let's take it one step closer to the reality and bare truth of what harm reduction must mean for all of us here today. And that is, harm reduction must incorporate not just workers, but our brothers, sisters, neighbors, and peers. Let's begin destigmatizing people who use drugs and where they use them. Let's embrace and be proud that our community housing and harm reduction policy, and within it, an overdose emergency response plan that provides residents the choice to be a part of. Let us seek comfort to know that there are systems in place and the people to help. Allowing harm reduction services and training within community housing provides a direct solution to a dark gap that so many people have fallen through and are no longer here with us today. Will we continue to perpetuate these gaps, or will we rise to the occasion and become part of the solution? With proper training, knowledge, and skills, and the tools, we can empower residents to prepare, prevent, and treat overdoses while protecting themselves from COVID-19. Yes, we can do both. I see a voluntary emergency response team that are identified as trained and certified to provide first aid, overdose prevention, naloxone administration, and resuscitation. Having this peer support accessible and without stigma can be the key factor required to save lives and prevent sudden illness or injury. We have an opportunity today to change the way we think about people who use drugs and alleviating the shame that makes people want to use alone. Having trained responders that are available, and can act in a moment of crisis is exactly what we need to see the stop to these preventable deaths. We can cast away the secrets and darkness and shine the biggest and brightest light of love and support to our neighbors. When we think of the logistics...
Sorry, your time is used up. Thank you. Appreciate any directors have any questions, comments? No, thank you so much for your deputation. Do we have another deputant?
I believe Cliff Martin is on the line. Mr. Martin?
Yes.
If you could make your deputation.
Please proceed, yeah.
Now?
Yep.
Hello, my name is Cliff Barton. I'm chair of the Residents Association, the largest social housing building in the nation. And our Residents Association have been administering naloxone and giving it out to residents in our building and in the larger community for several years. Recently, agencies have come and set up tables in our lobby with needles, pipes, and so forth, and we have children and seniors that see those, and our Residents Association have had them removed. I think there has to be a subtle approach to harm reduction. Last year alone, we administered 80 shots to people in stairwells and different places in the building. We have a problem in that we have drug dealers that are users, and we have residents, just regular residents that are users that are not an issue. Nobody in the building thinks they're an issue. But the drug dealers have been there 7 or 8 years and have as many customers as the local convenience store. And so we won't give needles because we don't think that's appropriate, but we have 200 naloxone in our small space in the basement. And we clean up needles. We've supplied bins to the third-party security. We have a concern that the local staff throw those needles in the regular garbage instead of giving them to the city for appropriate disposal. And we've been doing this for many years. We think that we've done a good job at being discreet. And if I can, and I think that this should continue. I think that tenants should be involved and encouraged. And I can ask Chair Tim Murphy if I could spend the last minute speaking about the deputation policy, please.
We don't actually, sorry, the deputations are supposed to be on the subject matter. We're not talking about deputation policy today, so.
Yes, but I came of when I was on the board of directors, I started the deputation policy, and it's been changed recently, and there's no way to speak to the board because of that change on issues that aren't on the agenda.
Understood, but we're not talking about the deputation policy today.
Is there an opportunity to put it on the agenda?
No.
He's always free to email members of the board, including the chair.
Okay.
Sorry, but thank you. So on the subject of your deputation, however, are there any questions or comments from board members?
Yeah, I have a question or comment. Just asking about what you said, Clifford, about table in the lobby. Was that a health provider that did that, or just tenants?
Yes, there were a few health providers. There were a few health providers that came and brought those, and everything was exposed, and we told them to take it down. Because the children, we have young children.
Sorry, I understand that. I don't know if that's the policy. And which health providers was that? It wasn't a community health clinic, I'm sure.
It was, one came from near Kensington Market, St. Christopher. I think Riverdale came once. And I think Sherburne Health came once. We have an agency on the first floor that invites these people into our building, and they don't have the authority to do so, but they do, and it's scary, you know, to have that there. So we had them take it away. There has to be a more subtle and discreet approach to harm reduction, in our view.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
I'm not sure whether this is appropriate to disclose, but I'd be interested in knowing what building you're in or what building you're referring to.
200 Wellesley Street East.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments?
Just a quick comment, Tim, it's Linda, and just thank you for the deputations. I think the deputations actually reveal the complexity of this issue. And I do think that this policy, we actually did look at it tenant services and felt that it was actually a good start, but was not going to answer all of the complexities that are involved with this. So thank you.
Certainly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there another deputant, Dara?
Sorry, no, we weren't able to reach the last deputant on this item. So
Okay.
Mr. Martin is the last one.
Okay, thank you. So I can go to the substantive discussion post deputant. And I see we're kind of running up to our agenda, end of our agenda too. So
maybe I could just say, Tim, that we did actually review it fully at the last Tenant Services Committee. And I think our committee is actually recommending that we approve this policy, knowing that this is a beginning, that we actually do think that there should be a policy in place in Toronto Community Housing, that we actually appreciate the work that's going on. And expect that people have read the policy, unless you want to hear from Scott or Lindsay.
I think we can go, just given the time and the fact that you guys reviewed it and the material was available. I think it's just go to questions if that's okay from any board member. It looks like you did such a good job.
I just like someone to answer. Sorry, I'd just like someone to answer Mr. Martin's question about tables in the lobby, et cetera, and whether there's been any feedback outside of 200 Wellesley. I think it would be helpful to know exactly that. Thank you.
So I can try to speak to that. We did come to the realization as we were consulting on this policy that it's a bit of a Wild West out there. There isn't an orderly process for partners who want to provide harm reduction services to come into our buildings to figure out when it's appropriate to use space, to figure out how to talk to the community about whatever they're setting up in advance. And this policy contains components that are meant to remedy that, to require community meetings in advance of setting up harm reduction services, and to basically set up an intake process for those partners.
Okay.
I just know in the seniors unit, we are approaching, there's the lenses going in, we're selecting one provider for each building instead of numerous providers for each building. And then each tenant gets the service. It's not a lobby effort. It's a tenant service provision. Is there anything different in this approach here?
Not necessarily. I mean, tenants are always entitled to healthcare services and have been the entire time.
In the lobby. Do they get them in the lobby? That's my question. Mr. Martin's talking about kind of the lobby delivery.
So I don't think we conceive of the lobby being the best place to provide any kind of health service. We're not prescriptive in this policy about what rooms are available, but I can say that the general conversation has been around using meeting rooms or common areas that are otherwise not in use to have public meetings, to have drop-in programs, in the same way that we would provide that to seniors for, socialization, cognitive, like cognitive activities like art classes, or just regular education programs that we would provide to any number of tenants.
But I think what you're hearing though is a fair degree of concern that we'd like you to be definitive that you're not providing these services in the lobby.
So I think that that's helpful to know. I don't think there's any intention to provide healthcare services in the lobby. But if that's something that the board wants to prescribe, that would require us to sort of add that.
I'm not sure that, Scott, it's Kevin. I'm not sure that it necessarily requires subscription. I mean, it's just common sense in a building. We have, and I think as it relates to 200 Wellesley, we need to have a very candid discussion with the agency that's in that building in terms of how they facilitate these discussions. Because I agree that this is, with the points that were raised by, the tenant in his deputation, that there's this is important work to do, but there is a time and a place to do it that is also appropriate given the population, you know. And again, it just goes to, you know, this is not a one size fits all solution. Our tenants are not, you know, homogeneous. They are varied. And so we need to be respectful of that. And we will be.
And we
Yeah,
will
and
be.
that's, I just didn't want anyone coming away from watching this with the sense that we were, you know, going to be providing harm reduction healthcare services in the lobby of our buildings. So
No, we will not. And so I will make this commitment. No, we will not, Tim. And to
Thank
the
you.
extent that that has occurred, we will ensure it no longer occurs.
Yes, that's excellent. Adele and Brian.
There was just a section, I think it's like 5.6, that talks about TCHC does not provide the naloxone kits, but staff can purchase them themselves. So can you speak to that and what liability we take on as an organization if staff are purchasing them and imagine administering them themselves, as opposed to something that TCHC is providing?
So the structure of the policy is intended to leave it up to the staff person to carry naloxone if they choose, but to take us out of the role of a distribution channel. We also speak in the policy to partnering with other organizations. And I can say that naloxone is available for free. Many of our staff do already procure it, and they exist in a space where they don't know if the company will stand behind them if they use it.
Yeah, that's my question.
This policy would say that the company does stand behind them. We can say that naloxone is available in two forms, an injector and a nasal spray.
Okay.
And that its chemical composition is not such that it creates problems for people when administered to someone who's not suffering an overdose. It interacts with the part of the body that interfaces with the opioid and basically blocks that connection. So if you were to be given naloxone accidentally, it's not going to harm you.
Okay.
We're saying that staff can carry it and that we're going to stand behind them.
Okay. The standing behind part was my question. Thank you.
Brian?
Well, I had another question, but on Adele's question, why wouldn't we keep a supply in our various offices in the various, you know, units that we have? For you know, for staff to access when necessary. Pardon?
I was going to say, I wasn't sure if Kevin wanted to take this question.
You're the subject matter expert on it, so I will let you go with it.
So there was a determination made that if we took on the role of distributor, we would take on the risk of ensuring that the supply was always in stock, it was always up to date, that we didn't have anything that had expired, and that was a risk that we weren't ready to recommend as staff.
Okay, so then, but if you're standing, if the staff is obtaining it themselves and we're standing behind the staff, aren't we at the same risk that what they could?
No. It's about protecting. It's about being supportive of staff who make the decision to implement or to use it. We're saying if you decide as a staff person to use it, we will back you in that circumstance. What we're not taking on is the liability of ensuring that we've got a full and complete supply, so that if a staff person who wants to use it can't get access to it because we don't have it, then we've created a liability for ourselves in that process. And that's what I assume is the assessment. That may be an assessment we want to continue to monitor and decide as an organization is the right one over time. Fair point, but the liability issue is not the same.
Okay.
That's correct.
liability is not the same. I do feel that we're putting staff in a position that, puts a certain onus on them, which I'm not sure that I feel comfortable, sort of downloading that onto staff.
That's a fair point, Brian. I think is that something we can take away, Sheila?
Yeah.
So Scott and Lindsay, if the policy is approved, we speak to developing procedures to enact the policy, and that is something that we can consider as we develop the procedure.
Absolutely.
How that's going to roll out.
So I think that makes sense. So I think probably what you're hearing is, as you're considering that, you have to consider issue of costs, of the administrative time to ensure that you've got, how do you inspect and make sure that, when is it used? How do you refill it? Time, expiry dates, all of that. So I think as you're considering and developing your policy procedures, I think you're hearing from the board is, as you can weigh all those factors and think about this, we'd like you to come back to us on that issue as you weigh it and have a discussion explicitly around that point. We understand you're not there yet, and that's fine, I think, at least from my perspective.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that.
My real question, Tim.
Okay. You can't do that, Brian. You're gonna have but I will go back to you then, Paula.
Oh, he has that question was really sort of a follow-up to Adele's, but my question is re 5.1 and trying to find that balance between assisting the individual and supporting them who has a addiction issue and the safety and enjoyment of other tenants, and the balance, which is always a struggle. So I didn't know whether the staff would comment on that issue, because certainly I can remember back to the mayor's task force where that was some major issues, that a number of tenants who occupied buildings where there was a high use of drug use, and the impact on them and their young children in that same building. And it's a real question of, supporting the individual and also supporting the remaining tenants in the building. And it's a real challenge, I'm sure, for staff to try and find that line.
So I can say that with respect to 5.1, we've tried to mirror the Human Rights Commission's approach to protections, and how they draw a line between protections for behavior versus protections for being a protected status. So what this says is that using drugs in and of itself is not grounds for eviction. And we're basically making a positive assumption here that using drugs in and of itself doesn't constitute interference with enjoyment. Now, if other behavior related to using drugs or as a direct consequence of using drugs were to interfere with another tenant's reasonable enjoyment, that could rise to being qualifying someone for eviction for cause. But that would be determined on a case-by-case basis. And what the board would be saying here, both in this section and in the preamble, is that the board does not consider it justifiable for staff to target people at any greater degree because they use drugs. So if someone's behaving badly, the cause is not relevant. It's the action that's being taken. But we wouldn't go after someone who uses drugs more aggressively.
It's the behavior.
Okay, Paula.
Just a couple of questions, because I think Brian's kind of really hit that on the head from the mayor's task force, and just ensuring the enjoyment of your tenancy. But have we checked anywhere with the landlord and tenant board, as far as I understand it's the behavior, not the act, but whether or not that would make it more difficult to get some, I guess we're saying taking drugs is okay, but selling them from your unit is not. Or do we have a standard there? I'm
That's
very
certainly
unclear on
correct.
this, because it's a very fine line that we're going to walk. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, selling drugs in your unit is and remains cause for an expedited eviction. It is one of the most egregious violations of a tenant's obligations.
So I think we need to be clear on that at the same time that we're having a harm reduction policy, so that it doesn't, we don't get into any issues if anything emerges. And then I'm going to ask that we have buildings where we understand there are a whole number of issues and behaviors related to addictions and mental health issues. We've discussed that earlier. And my question is, and we've assigned CSU to particular buildings, I'm going to assume that CSU carries naloxone because the Toronto police have to carry it. Am I correct?
You're correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
But is that a personal choice of the CSU, or is that a organization policy? Because I think we just flipped.
So CSU does carry naloxone. If a individual special constable chooses not to carry naloxone, they can exercise that discretion. CSU does carry naloxone, and I can tell you within the last period of time that they have saved 19 lives through administering naloxone. So it is an issue in our portfolio, and this policy, when approved, gives us an opportunity to develop procedures around how we will address this really serious issue.
But
So that are, how many officers have decided?
Hang on, Paula.
Sorry,
I think
sorry,
just
Brian.
yeah.
Isn't that the opposite of if we're asking them to carry it, they can refuse. Yes, but we're still sort of mandating it as a requirement unless they refuse. So aren't we taking on the responsibility to make sure the naloxone is not, past its due date or whatever?
Brian, I think the role here of CSU is different. They get called to these sorts of events. We're talking, about the other population. I think you have to kind of take that into balance as to why generally CSU carries it.
Sorry, our model is CSU is in the buildings getting to know people. That's our VRP model, and in difficult buildings, perhaps 200 Wellesley is one of them. So I appreciate that, Kevin, that they're called, but also the model is very clear that they're to be in buildings, getting to know people, et cetera,
establishing
I think
relationships.
Brian's question is actually correct.
Can I just say, I think it's great that more people are carrying the naloxone, and that this is actually, saving lives. And we actually have run a bit of a reputational risk in the community that in how long it's actually taken us to do this. The average community worker is carrying this, and just is seeing the advantage. And so I think it is a culture piece, and I agree that we shouldn't actually be forcing people, but I think it is actually, there's some progressiveness here too in terms of expanding the ability to save lives at a time when we actually have record overdoses in Toronto.
Amanda?
Naloxone. As a tenant, I carry naloxone, and I've assisted many residents, not many, but a few residents who overdosed, and on my job as well. So I think it's great to have that as a part of the CSC protocol when responding. And I also wanted to know, what's the support that's available for residents that have a dual diagnosis? The part of
Have a what? Sorry, Amanda?
Dual diagnosis.
A dual diagnosis. Dual diagnosis. Yeah.
So can someone tell me what that means?
Well, it probably means
somebody has a mental health issue and a physical health issue, or so if I can jump in, that I think actually we're not trying to solve all of the healthcare issues. I think you're raising a really important issue, Amanda, in terms of the complexity that people don't actually just present sometimes with one issue. I think this is actually dealing with the harm reduction process. But I'm encouraged by is that more and more of the buildings and TCHC is actually engaging in partnership with a range of healthcare providers who are providing services. There's some really good examples exactly in 200 Wellesley where we actually have on-site primary care, which is amazing. So just as a thought.
Yeah. I just wanted to bring that up because a lot of the people who suffer with substance abuse problems also have a mental health issue as well that contributes to that. So just wanted to know the supports around people that do have a dual diagnosis. But I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments, concerns? I think Sheila, Scott, Lindsay, et cetera, you've heard the high degree of interest in our naloxone policy. So my expectation is that'll be coming back to TSC fairly quickly and then back to the board.
Sheila, can you tell us if all officers carry it or how many of the complement have decided not?
I would have to reach out to CSU.
Okay.
But
We'll
as
have
we
this conversation, we can do that next time. Thank you.
Great. Okay.
All right, do we have a?
Can I just quickly ask, do we provide it to the CSU officers?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I assume the CSU number of CSU officers versus number of staff is a tad different.
Yeah.
Okay, so the motion is as set out there. Can we go back to full screen? I have a mover, Linda, seconder, Brian, all in favor. Passed. Well done. So we have, I'm not going to bother with information items. So I think we have the 2 consent agenda items left, which both have deputants. And I'm just wondering how people
Mr.
are
Chair,
doing
I'm
with
going to
time.
have to leave.
Yeah. Okay. So no, we're over time already.
So I'm going to suggest if the board is content that we move to item 2J first. The other item is an information item. It could wait till the next board meeting if we didn't get to it. The item 2J is an approval item. Even though
have we got quorum? Agenda. Have we got quorum?
Yes, we have quorum.
Okay.
And we also have the deputant in relation to item 2J on the line.
Okay. Proceed.
Ms. Duggan?
Hey, everyone. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, please proceed.
Proceed.
Okay. With respect to this agenda item, I want to reflect back to the beginning of this month on February 1st during the Governance, Communication, and Human Resources Committee meeting, where I mentioned that items on that agenda should be more reflective of governance, communications, and human resources matter within and throughout TCHC as a whole. The interim appointment of the Vice President of Human Resources is a prime example of what should have been discussed in the public session of that very meeting. If we look at this from a governance perspective, it doesn't appear as if TCHC is capable of hiring qualified persons to head up the Human Resources Department. Obviously, there were concerns about the previous head of HR at TCHC, with those concerns leading to the Reuben Tomlinson report. But to slip someone in on the slide doesn't bode well for governance.
I just don't feel this is appropriate.
Yeah,
Mr.
hang
Chair.
on.
I'm
I'm kind of with you. I'm not sure this.
No, out of order.
But when this
is an information report.
No, but
Sorry.
you know, I don't think it's
But
appropriate in a public session to be slagging individuals.
So,
but I'm making the point that if we're not looking well at TCHC, if we're borrowing staff from the city, right? And then with the communication part, why was this not mentioned as soon as she was put in that seat, which was January 4th? You're acting like this is something that takes effect today. She's been in that seat. Barbara's been in that seat since January 4th. So as far as communications, that was a fail as well on this particular matter. And human resources, anything to do with human resources should have been brought up at the human resources session at the Governance, Communication, and Human Resources meeting.
So,
okay, so
if I'm wrong on those points, you let me know, but I don't think I am.
Well, we obviously
Thanks
think
for
you're
your
wrong.
input.
So, have any comments or questions for the deputant? No. So
This
thank
is a
you
board
for your
appointment.
input.
Thank you.
So now we proceed to a motion to approve 2J. John, seconded by Uba. All those in favor? Excellent. Thank you. What was left?
The item that's left is item 2F. It's an update on the design and construction of tenant services hubs and interior improvements. There are, we've been
I'm
advised.
going to
that Ms.
refer this to the next meeting. Let's just move it quickly if we can, unless we have to hear all the deputants today. But they all appear to be on the committee, so.
So we can either defer it and the deputants can be afforded the opportunity to depute at the next meeting, or
Yeah,
you can hear the deputants today and defer it or deal with it.
well, we're already over time and it feels like we're losing. Frankly, I have to go in 7 minutes, so.
So do I.
So it feels like, unfortunately, for the members of the committee, that we're going to have to defer this, but we'll defer it to the next meeting, and we'll make sure they're at the top of the agenda so that they can be heard.
It's a status update. It's a status update, Mr. Chair.
I understand, but they're still permitted to depute.
I get it.
So we'll defer the consideration of that, but understanding the deputants will put the item near the top so that they can be heard.
Mr. Chair, do you have the board motion to establish a permanent board seat for Kevin Marshman?
I was going to move that when he wasn't here to object.
You were waiting until I needed to take a bio break to slip the whole bio break.
Yes.
I appreciate
right.
the sentiment. Thank you.
So I think we've now gone through all the approval
Sorry, it's not
items.
just a sentiment, Kevin. It's actual motion.
It's an implementation plan.
Can we move adjournment?
Can we? Yeah. So John moves adjournment.
I just have a quick comment to make before we adjourn, if you don't mind, please. I'll be quick.
Of course. Yeah.
Okay. And one is just a good news that I want to share. I noticed ever since we took back and TCHC's direct management, things change for the better in terms of cleanliness, in terms of customer service and what have you. And another quick note is I just want to thank Sheila, someone who I don't even know how she knew I was a board member, reached out to me and she said I was evicted from my place November 30th. And she was on the wait list for housing connections for more than 10 years. So she reached out to Sheila and Sheila connected her to Richard Grove and Ashley Fontaine, yeah, sorry about that. And within 4 weeks before Christmas, that single mother and her 2 kids were housed. So thank you so very much. I just had to share that.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. So with that, motion moved to adjourn. All those in favor? Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your giving us 25
Thank you,
extra
Kevin.
minutes.
Thank you, folks. It's been a fun ride. Have a.
Kevin,
I wish you a good journey.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks.
We'll miss you.
Thank you. Thank you.
We'll have 3
Bye now.
committee meetings to go to.
Pass Kevin's motion now. It is.